Hello and good morning. Welcome to Debate Dissection, where we'll be taking a scalpel to all the latest and greatest debates that have existed on the internet. Only the best for this audience. But I'm joined by my wonderful co-host and partner in crime, better than Ember. Ember, how are you today?
Hello, hello. I continue to persist despite the horrors.
Yes, yes. Despite the horrors, yeah. If it feels like something's wrong with the world, it may not be you. It may not be you. It might be the real madness that we're currently settling into, and hopefully will change at some point in the near future. I just wonder if, like, after this nonsense of fundamentalism has changed, whether the entire world is going to breathe a big sigh of relief once it's over, kind of thing, and we're back to, relatively secular things where we're not, you know, attacking countries because they happen to have a different religion or things like that. Um, Right. Well, today we've got a debate between Glen Scrivener, and no, I am not stalking Glen Scrivener because we did him and Woodford before, and it wasn't bad. It was pretty good actually. I must say, sort of as apologists go, it is a he's not too bad, right? He's not one of these horrible, awful, dumpster fire MAGA trolls or whatever. He's not a flat earther. I'll give him that. I'll pay at least that
No.
much, right? And I think
Mhm.
he is an old Earth, or at least gives a general nod in the way of science. So as all things go, he isn't too bad. But I didn't know who Justin Brierley was, who's the moderator, and this is a bit of an odd one because it's more like a discussion than it is a formalized debate kind of thing. So it's more them sitting down and talking, which isn't bad. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just the moderator has more of an input, and it makes sense that he's an apologist because they sort of bring up Scrivener's book. But I think from sort of going through it a little bit, I think that O'Connor, as usual, does the most fantastic job. Like, he is really good. And the reason why I chose this is because it's one of those claims. The debate is does Christianity it was the Western world because, like, does it owe you to Christianity? How I find the original title, but it's sort of that claim
And
that
it's
Christianity is. Did Christianity
Western
give us?
values.
Well, yeah. Did Christianity give us Western values? And that's sort of a claim that I have heard many, many times.
It's popular
Um,
lately.
it is, and sort of it's one that kind of, I mean, it doesn't annoy me. It's just one of those things that gives an eye roll. You know what I mean? That's just sort of, um, why you would think that Christianity is responsible for Western values when it seems to be Christianity that's always dragging its heels when we try to catch up with modern sensibilities.
Hmm.
So I yeah, I uh, I I think that it should be good. It should be interesting. Um, but first off, if you do want to help me out and help out the channel, just hit the like button, leave a comment, yell in the chat. I don't mind. Well, don't yell in the chat. Comment in the chat. What happened there?
Oh
That's weird.
no, we're a
That's
step
weird.
regressed or something.
That's okay. I just probably chose the wrong window. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and get back on screen. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so this
We
was a bit
time
of a.
traveled.
I know. Wow. So this was a bit of a weird one. Like I said, the format's a bit strange. Um, I didn't know who Justin Brierley was, but it kind of does make sense now that it's another apologist because the entire format's strange. I will say, though, I do. Alex O'Connor is kind of where it's at as far as atheist arguments go. There's a bit I disagree with him on, but he really can step into a space that's completely dominated by Christians, and in the politest possible way, absolutely ruin their arguments. It's but I do notice that he really does avoid, these apologists that the MAGA trolls are out there, and they have no problem with saying the most awful stuff in order to get sort of a one-up on a debate, like just sort of, whether you can believe them or not is another story. I have no idea why people follow these guys that are just lying about their positions or making stuff up. I have no idea. Seems counterproductive to me, but hey, you do you.
Well, there's a debate bro subculture that isn't actually interested in the truth. They want the battle and being dishonest and provocative and inflammatory and bad faith and they just want to trigger a crash out. They think it's funny,
Yeah, and I mean,
whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's really a few schools of Christian apologist debaters out there, kind of thing. You do have people like, the Hovens or whatever, right? Their views are so wacky, but, do they sincerely believe them? Yeah, maybe. Some of them do, some of them don't, but some of them I'm convinced sincerely believe in this, the world is 6,000 years old and all of that kind of stuff. Others, I think, just don't believe it all, but at least they will, the ones that believe it will engage honestly. And I think Scrivener, he is engaging honestly, as opposed to the trolls out there who just want to, get views or whatever. So, I will give him that.
Hold that thought when we get to the genocide subject.
Okay.
He does, for the most part, engage in
for
good
the most
faith,
part,
but
yes.
when backed into a corner, he gets a little snaky.
Okay. I must have missed that part. Okay.
I haven't seen the debate either. I just know how Glen works.
Oh, okay. I look, the Stephen Woodford debate against him was the first one I've seen of this particular gentleman, and I mean, I wasn't blown away or anything, but at least he seemed like a respectable interlocutor. Like he seemed like he could have a debate without being an utter tool, which is increasingly harder and harder to find these days. So, I will. At least acknowledge that he at least has some manner of decorum in these debates. So, yeah. But anyway, we'll get started if you're ready to go.
He's a top shelf chap who happens to believe horrible things.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's definitely one description.
A demonstration of what Hitchens used to say. Religion causes good people to do how did he phrase it? I've never been a quotes person. It's not my thing.
It's
good people doing horrible things that takes religion.
Yeah, so good people will do good things, evil people will do evil things, but to make a good person do evil things, you need religion. That's generally what he said. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. But anyway, we'll get started. Again, hit the like, ring the bell. Point at a squirrel. I don't mind. Just help the channel out in some way. Tell a friend. Tell two, in fact, if you are blessed enough to have two friends. Or
tell your enemies.
Send it
to your red hat uncle who thinks that genocide is a good thing. Actually,
maybe
we do something a bit different on this new show, Uncommon Ground. It's sort of an exercise in empathy, if you will, but essentially just to make sure we do recognize at least where we're both coming from, mutual understanding. So what we ask our guests to do is to essentially try to summarize as best they can the viewpoint on this question, this subject of their opposite number. So Alex, I wonder if you could have a go. And
I want to keep
this is neat.
I want to keep this in there because I skipped over the introduction was really long-winded and it was kind of like, Alex, you are so effervescent, and then it's just like, okay, cool, yeah, all right, you're doing your big intro thing, and stroking the egos of the interlocutors to get them all warmed. You're fluffing the interlocutors. It's just, I skipped that, but I want to keep this in because this is a really good question, and this is a steel man, right? So straw man, you take a more basic version, a sort of distorted version of your opponent's argument, and attack a false version. A steel man is you take the strongest possible version of your opponent's argument and put that up. Basically, you basically say, hey, that is the best argument that I can make out of it that you're putting up. So I think it's really good. You can always tell when someone's acting in sort of bad faith when they can't steel man an argument, right? Like
it makes me think of what my debate teacher way back when I was a teenager used to say is if you can't present your opponent's arguments in a convincing way, you don't really understand either side of the argument.
Well, I don't like doing an entire debate as, the opposite debates kind of. I don't know. I feel like I don't, really want to do that. It's just not something that I want to do because obviously we're shouting out to a space where people are listening. And it seems to be that some people cannot decide between, well, even parody and reality, much less, if you're pretending to be on the other side. So I don't want to do those, but I don't mind going, okay, here's the strongest possible. And it's really interesting to see that, especially like flat earthers, they cannot steelman arguments. They can't do it. It's beyond them. Like, because whenever they're asked to steelman, it's sort of like, oh, they think that the Earth is rotating 10 million miles. And it's just like, dude, that's not a steelman. Like, seriously. So I think it's a really good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great way to open, I think. It evokes that old Greek adage that the hallmark of intelligence is the ability to entertain an idea and hold it within your mind without accepting and believing it.
Right.
There might be some back and forth in this, giving us a sense of what you believe Glen's position is on this whole question of where we got our morality from in the 21st century West.
It seems to me that Glen is proposing what has come to be quite a popular view at the moment, especially among Christians, but also among some secular historians, that Western civilization, warts and all, as it were, the good stuff, the bad stuff, just the nature of the West, is more thoroughly indebted to Christianity than at least has been given credit for in the past, sort of 100 or 200 years in academia and Enlightenment thinking. That what we often perceive of as secular advancements against church doctrine and religious thinking is in fact a blossoming of the Christian spirit. So when we look at things like Enlightenment values and freedoms and equality and all of these kinds of things, and we think of them as, Enlightenment thinkers asserting these against religious influence, they're actually secretly wearing Christian clothing, hence the air we breathe, because you don't even notice that it's there. Because it's been so successful, in other words.
Yeah. How's that, Glen?
I think that's an exceptional description of Tom Holland's view, I think. And so Tom Holland, one of those who's absolutely popularized this thesis in his 2019 book, Dominion. I think he and I would disagree on certain things. I think...
Yeah, and I mean, that's to be expected. I totally get it. I think that's a great steelman, though. I mean, that's basically Glen's argument at its strongest. I would have issues with it. I would definitely push back on that. I think that Western values are more a product of liberalism and the Enlightenment than I do Christianity, but it's impossible to say that Christianity hasn't hugely influenced the West for good and ill kind of thing. Western values, though, don't seem to be in line with biblical values. Right? You can sort of always cherry pick, but there doesn't seem to be anything unique from Christianity that Western society has produced. I'm not sure I could accredit, say, for instance, freedom of religion, right? That's one of the values that Western society has, that you should be free to choose whatever religion that you want, and that definitely doesn't come from Christianity. There's no way you possibly could say it does. Being sort of if you don't follow Christianity, you're going to be tortured to death, or tortured forever, for infinity, it's not something that aligns with that particular Western value. But I think that some Christians would say, well, that's not a Western value. And I would say, what?
How though?
Yeah, I don't.
That's the core of the Enlightenment from a certain point of view, is the church kept schisming, and different factions kept trying to kill everybody who believed different things. And people started to get it in their head, hey, maybe we should stop doing that. Maybe it's okay to have different flavors of Christianity, because these bastards killed my cousin, and those bastards are going to kill me. Like, maybe we could stop killing each other when we all believe pretty much the same thing, but not exactly. And that planted the seed that started to break the stranglehold of the church, and gave us the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and all the other ideas, but also opened up the flower of freedom of religion to other entirely different religions, which was pretty cool too.
Yeah.
He would more own the word blossoming that you used, that Enlightenment values are a blossoming of a Christianity that was sort of inherent in that progression. I think I would make a slightly more modest claim on that point, and just say that those developments were unthinkable without Christianity, and have drawn on some profoundly Christian intuitions in the developments that they make. I think one of the issues that I have back and forth with Tom over is everything Christianity? Like literally everything? Is every blossoming, is every development, are we still in the same species? If we've evolved, to have six fingers instead of 5, is it still Homo sapiens? If we've got to a Christianity that is now okay with infanticide and abortion, are we still? Is this still Christian? I see Tom actually sort of drawing more of a circle, more of a line now.
He kind of, his Christianity kind of is okay with infanticide, and as far as abortion, while on the surface they're against it, the Old Testament is pretty clear about how God feels about abortion.
Well, yeah, but this is interesting, because where do you draw the line between Christianity and the Bible? Especially if, as we sort of know today, Christianity is not necessarily rooted in the values of the Old Testament, right? Like, this is the thing.
No. I don't think it's even rooted in the New Testament. They've gone completely off script. They're just holding up the book and going, but holy man, but nothing comes from that.
Right. Yeah, I think that the Christianity and sort of the child sacrifice of the ancient peoples of Canaan, there's no way I'd describe that as a principle of Christianity, even though it is in the Old Testament. I really don't think that's something we could hold up as a Christian value, or a Western value or something. But
that's another good point. The whole Christianity trying to take credit for the moral foundations of Judaism. Those aren't Christian values; they're Jewish values.
Yes, correct. Yeah, absolutely. But did Christianity contribute to the moral foundation, or the moral values, or the values that we propose in society? Well, sure. I think it's unavoidable when the Christians wipe out nearly every single other religion in the area, right? So if we're talking the West, we're really talking about Europe to America kind of thing. So not only did Christianity wipe out every single other religion and other sects of Christianity as well, other denominations of Christianity, it's impossible to sort of go, well, none of our values were influenced by Christianity. Like it has been, and then they colonized other countries forcing Christianity on them, often by gunpoint, it's sort of course, it's going to have an impact. The question is that impact for the better or the worse? That's the question. And would these values have been achieved without Christianity? And that's the question that we're really asking. Would we have a better version of Western values, or we have the same Western values without Christianity? It's very, very hard to say, because the Enlightenment was a response to the way that the church really pervaded society and did some terrible things with hand in hand with the aristocracy.
There is some definite lines of evolution, but I think we can compare culture to culture and see what moral values every human civilization seems to come up with independently. And we can cross those off of the list of things Christianity can take credit for, because every other human has come up, or every other, maybe not even every, but like if any other civilization comes up with it, then it's not Christianity that it's humans that are coming up with these things. And when we cross-reference, we can make any list of values we want. We would be very, very hard pressed to find even one that's exclusive to Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that, if it had been a different religion, and that's sort of what I was getting to, like if it had been Islam that was basically being the religion that was killing people and cracking down on them and having inquisitors run around, and the Enlightenment was the pushback on that, I think that we would have developed the same values over the Enlightenment. After the Dark Ages, it just would have been a different religion that we're pushing back on. So I really don't see I think Christianity is the problem, not the origin of Western values. I think that Western values are a response to those primitive theocracies, not coming from them, right? So this idea that instead of a divine right to rule, you have ultimately power is vested in the people, who then decide by act of conscience which religion they follow. I think that is a response to Christianity rather than being, drawn from it in some way. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm rambling a bit, but that's sort of what I was getting to.
No, it's... There's potential tangents buried in there, as is always the case. But
yeah.
Basically, yeah. If as people in the chat are noting, like, what if it had been worship of Inanna? Would we have the same values? Would the theocracies have happened, and then the values that developed to counter the theocracies? Like, there's some things that happened when they happened because of the way Christianity manifested through the churches and theocracies and so forth. But it doesn't necessarily mean that Christianity caused those things.
Right. And just quickly, Left-Handed Jedi, who is just such an amazing person and definitely a reader of some quality. Thank you so much, Jedi. I'll just have to read these out. Those go out to... Oh, nice. Okay, we've got sound effects on here by no act of mine. I love it. We've got Brenta, better than Amber. Congratulations. Yeah, good shot, Jedi. Well done. Believe me, bro. Or actually, that does say that's not how you spell believe me, okay? English has some stupid rules. One is
me.
Believe me, bro. I don't know what that's supposed to say. I've made that mistake many times. Remember, I before E, except after C, except when the sound is A, and it doesn't always hold true, so ignore what I said previously.
Me. Belay that order, you scurvy blocker.
Fuzzy pickle. Wow.
Oh my.
Okay, that's a vivid image. Joey Crikey. Well done. Winners, chicken dinners. Please enjoy your emotes and other benefits Awesome. Yeah, we do have a member
Oh,
stream
yeah.
coming up on Wednesday night Eastern Time. But thank you so much, Left-Handed Jedi. You are a scholar and a saint, and that's just so good. Awesome. All right, moving right along. Did you have anything more to add on the whole question? Like, we could talk about this for ages because it is something we
for
run
sure.
into a lot. Yeah.
Than he did when he wrote Dominion. I think he might say blossoming. I think 2019 Tom Holland would say blossoming.
Yes.
I think I would say ripple effects that is unthinkable without.
Yeah, with Christianity as the stone that drops into the pond.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem to me that Tom...
Every time he's saying Tom Holland, I feel like he's talking about the Spider-Man actor. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's just like, wow, Spider-Man has some weird takes on Christian. No, I get you. It's not the same person. But yeah, everything blossoming. Look, it's like saying, well, we owe everything to communism because without communism, we wouldn't have had this, sort of in the 50s, the Red Scare and, that's sort of what you're saying, right? Like, it's not that your values came out of communism, it's the failure of communism to deliver on the promises that have led to the ultra-capitalist society that we're currently in. Whether that's a good or a bad thing is largely up to debate in your position on consumerism, but it's sort of like saying that. It's like saying, well, if I didn't, have somebody attack me, I wouldn't be the same person, and therefore I've got to be grateful to them for attack. You know what I mean? Like it's that, these things sort of need Christianity to exist, because without Christianity, it wouldn't be the society that we live in now. And it's like, okay, but was it beneficial for the values that we have in Western society? Or a lot of the time, did it hold us back from progressing towards those values? That's the question.
Well, I mean, The Princess Bride has a perfect moral example for us to illustrate the point. Inigo Montoya. If the six-fingered man had not killed his father, he would not have become the world's greatest swordsman. So he should be thankful to the six-fingered man.
But doesn't
Probably
he?
Not. He
doesn't
didn't seem
he,
to think so.
Right. Doesn't he wrestle with that and sort of say, "But he took my father, and therefore I have to." That was a really good film, and it's a really good character as well, because he kind of wrestles with a lot of sort of philosophical issues through that. I really did like that film. I gotta say, but yeah, at one point doesn't he sort of say, "Hey, I became the greatest swordsman on earth because he killed my father. So isn't it good that he killed my father? But I don't care because he took my father from me, and therefore I will kill him," kind of thing. Which was an odd, yeah.
I love that, especially, I saw it when I was a child, of course, and so that lodged in my brain. And I'm like, we can philosophy in circles all day, but ultimately there comes a certain point of action where you go, you know what? I don't care. The fucker's gonna die.
Right.
Has become more sort of specifically Christianized in his thinking over the past few years. I'd imagine that if he were to rewrite Dominion today, it might be a little stronger on that point.
Well, in fact, he rewrote the beginning to Dominion, because I think even in the writing of Dominion, I think he came to some clearer convictions. And I honestly think that the opening to Dominion is just this beautiful proclamation of the cross. And as a historian, he is able to go back to sort of first century Rome and imagine himself into the sandals.
That wasn't originally there, the opening with the crucifixion.
So the opening of the crucifixion was the last thing that he wrote.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, that was interesting. I didn't know.
And so, and he put it at the beginning of the book. And I think that is significant. I think in the audiobook, for instance.
Sorry?
That's a popular way to write books, I guess, for lack of a better term. It's a thing Stephen King suggests in his book on writing, is instead of like killing yourself to nail down the perfect intro, skip it. Finish the story and then write the intro that fits the story you just wrote.
Right. Look, I'm not like Stephen King is an excellent writer. I definitely wouldn't, aside from all else, maybe some of his ideas have been a bit weird, but he's a good writer. I will give him that. He knows how to tell a story. There's a reason why he's, one of the best-selling authors of all time. He does write an excellent story. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean,
I have
but the thing,
thought on how they're already tangented onto this Tom Holland's book. I wonder if, like, for Glen, this is a philosophical conversation on some of the differences between his position and Holland's position. Right. But from Alex's perspective, if that was intended as a slight to present a similar position from a different book, as if to indicate, I know we're here to sell your book, I haven't read it,
Maybe.
That is the bit that he voices. He voices the beginning and the end of Dominion. I think he's since re-recorded.
Kind of summarizes the view, doesn't it? You sort of get to the end and you analyze it all, and then you realize that Christianity deserves to be right at the beginning now. That seems to be the view.
And at the cross. Yeah.
Wow, that was a sneaked-in attack on him. Like, it's like history, where you look at all of history and then you decide that Christianity should be here now. Yeah, at the beginning. Sort of this. And I think that it is kind of, from my position, I do think it is a retroactive thing of looking at all of history and going, well, Christianity was at the start, so our values must be drawn from it, and ignoring all of the other influences that it's had. Like, from my point of view, I think that, our current modern, like, because if you talked about Western values back in even 200 years ago, right, it wouldn't be the same as the values that we have now. It would be to project Christianity everywhere. It would be to colonize other places. It would be to really project your ideology onto other people's. And I think that sort of modern values is, well, if you have got different values, you sort of leave them with it and you take appropriate action. You don't try to enforce with violence those values on other people. Whereas 200 years ago, it was completely different. It was, these natives don't have Western values. Oh, let's go and give them Western values. Let's go and force those Western values on them. Take their children away, make them basically destroy all of their crops and fields, and force them to turn up for food, but only if they do certain things. This is colonization, right? It is the pushing of your society and society's values on other people without any consent whatsoever, right? So I think that when we look at that, to sort of say, hey, well, Christianity isn't responsible for colonialism, and really, colonialism is antithetical to modern Western values, I think that's really misleading. I often talk about the doctrine of discovery. It was a official doctrine from the papacy. It was from the Pope, endorsed by the Catholic Church's highest leader and propagated out to all the countries. The doctrine stated quite clearly that if you discovered a land and it was not inhabited by Christians, it was not populated. The land was free to take.
Although it should be noted, as Dr. Kipp points out in his book, God's Propaganda, that has a long tradition in, shall we say, Judeo-Christian history.
Yes.
Because every time one group was out of the Levantine area that we now call Israel, the Palestinian region, they would say the land is empty, even though there's other people there, but it's not their group that's there. And so there's no people there.
Right. Yep. Yeah, because they're not the right kind of people. But the doctrine of discovery was very specific about who was the right kind of people, and that was, Christians. So, I think that when you're talking about
Christian, if you're not Christian, you're not people. And that's a thing
Right.
that we're still struggling with here in the US and probably elsewhere, where as soon as somebody finds out you're not a Christian, they look at you like you're a turd or a rabid possum or something, something very unpleasant to be stayed way away from. Because if you're not Christian, you're not human.
Well, I don't think modern Christian evaluations does go that deep. I certainly think there's a bias against atheists, against people who aren't Christian kind of thing, especially in these fundamentalist circles. I think that when you get outside of the US, you get a lot less than that, right? Like, in my country, if you're Muslim, it's like, so who cares? Like that's cool. I don't, nobody actually cares. If you're an atheist, most people are atheists where I am. Please do not listen to Andrew Wilson. It is not majority Christian in Australia. Trust me, he doesn't live here. He has no idea what he's talking about.
Not knowing. Americans who don't know something feel encouraged to talk about that something even more.
Well, I think that's, that could be applied to a lot of people, Ems. That's not unique to Americans, basically. I do grant you that.
Ken Ham isn't from the US, so yeah.
Yeah, I know. We got to wear that one. Look, I think that sort of dehumanization of everyone not of your religion is a Christian value. It kind of, you can sort of point to the Bible and say, hey, the Bible doesn't say that and things like that. But it's like, but what were Christians actually doing? I mean, who wiped out the Cathars? Who wiped out the Lombard? Was it Christians? Yes, absolutely. It was the Catholic Church. Now, I know that this is so hard to do because some Christians will go, yeah, but the Catholics aren't real Christians. It's like, just stop. Like, seriously, they have been the Christians in power for hundreds of years. Like, just,
The Marcionites.
The what?
The Marcionites.
Right. Yeah.
Is the stone in the pond?
Well, maybe one day it'll be Tom having the conversation with you, Alex. I'd love to host that at some point.
Oh, sure. Who's welcome.
If you're watching, Tom, the invitation's there.
Or if you're not, the invitation is
absolutely
still there.
But in a sense, Glen, you've sort of written this book, The Air We Breathe, which is, as you called it, Tom Holland Light, or a sort of...
Dominion for Dummies, and I'm the dummy. Yeah, I'm the dummy. Yeah.
But no, it's a really helpful, accessible way into, that bigger thesis that Tom Holland has obviously sketched out.
Well, it's confessionally Christian, whereas he did not write that book from that.
Wow, he's just throwing shade at himself. I must admit that sort of at least being a little bit of self-deprecation is it does help in a debate, right? Like, it does show that sort of humility that you should have in a debate kind of thing. That you're at least trying to not sort of put down the opponent, and you're willing to see your own flaws as well. I think it does a lot to humanize you, and I think Glen's very good at that. He sort of humanizes himself a lot while he does these debates, instead of just going, well, I know everything, I'm the expert, I'm this. And O'Connor's really good at it as well, right? He's really good at saying, hey, but I might have it wrong. I could do this wrong. It humanizes you a lot. I think it's a very good tactic. Even if you're not going to concede a point, just sort of to say, hey, if you're right, you're right. That's fine. It does humanize you a lot. I do like that.
Perspective at all, is it? Yeah.
Well, let's do the same thing back, if that's okay. Where do you anticipate Alex goes when it comes to this question of how we received our moral intuitions?
I guess we'll see. But I think piecing together from things that I've heard Alex say about the Dominion thesis, I think it would be I think you think that I think that we think that Christianity is the air we breathe because of the Bible. And where I think your critique might come is it would be surprising if the Bible was the source of our current moral values, because I've read the Bible. And I recognize in the Bible things that are very bracing, to say the least, and not exactly like modern Western democratic values. Therefore, we can question whether Christianity, and the Bible in particular, is the source of those values. I'm not sure what you might think about how Christian abolitionism was, or how Christian the eradication of infanticide was, or how Christian the establishment of charities was. I don't think I've heard you.
So this came up with the Woodford debate, but it bears repeating. The Christian abolition of infanticide. It's a thing they like to take credit for,
Yes.
but never actually happened. They made
Correct.
a big stink out of people with unwanted pregnancies, putting their children out in the deep woods and whatnot. Exposure, they call it these days, and it's a thing that the Christian emperors started banning, and they had to re-ban it every 40 years or so because it never stopped. All the way up until the 1960s, it was still happening. My grandmother told me stories of people she knew who did it before safe and legal abortion became a thing.
Mm-hmm. And the Catholic Church had to put out a proclamation that that they put out a proclamation that babies go directly to heaven. And then they had to reverse that because a lot of people were going, well, all I can offer this child is a life of pain and misery, or I could just give it heaven instantly. And it caused massive problems. So they had to put out a proclamation that babies that have been killed go into some sort of purgatory, and they may go to heaven, they may not, to try and stop people from doing that. They had to reverse this. So it's a horrible topic. It's definitely something that has happened over the ages. I don't know. I don't know whether Christianity had a great hand in stopping that, or whether it was Enlightenment values. Now, Enlightenment values of natural rights, sort of aka John Locke kind of stuff. I'm not sure that has an amalgam in Christianity, right? Like, people love to point towards, oh, we're made in the image of God, therefore we have these natural rights kind of thing. I'm not sure that line is distinct, because the Bible can be interpreted a number of different ways, and you can interpret it as, if something bad happens to you, you deserve what you get. And also, God puts rulers where they want them, so do what the rulers want. Render unto Caesar, basically. So I'm not sure that idea of everybody has inalienable rights particularly comes from the Bible.
Yeah, it doesn't say any such thing anywhere that I'm aware of. Maybe I missed it. Maybe it was somewhere in the Begots where I kind of zoned out a bit, but it pretty clearly doesn't say everyone has inalienable rights.
No, famously, the Begats do not have anything of substance in them other than this person gave birth to that person, basically. I mean, it just, it's got the Begats are just silly. It's just silly.
Speak about the historical side of things, but I think you're a Bible buff, and I think that might be where you go.
How's that, Alex?
It's certainly true that the Bible gives me pause, especially for Protestants who think that the Bible is sort of the foundational authority on what Christianity is all about. It's very difficult for me to square the paradox of a Christian text which has some quite explicit injunctions for and against things which are unthinkable today in the modern West, and somehow claiming ownership of those developments. But I think you're essentially either talking about two things when you say that the West is indebted to Christianity. You can either be talking about the Bible, or you can be talking about the history of the church. Those kind of are your two options, right?
Right. So it can't be current. Like, if you're talking about history, it can't be current Christian thinking, like the mainstream Christian thinking that is contributing to it. it must be something in the past, right? Because we don't get to how sort of, so if you compare the early church with modern Christian sensibilities, they're completely different, right? Mainstream Christian sensibility, even the sort of extreme right Christian sensibilities are completely different than the early church. So you can't be talking about the current thinking of Christian, leaders or Christian people as what shaped history, because that has changed
Right.
so much. So I totally get where he's coming from here.
Yeah, he's absolutely correct. And it kind of, so earlier today, I sometimes have YouTube videos on in the background while I'm doing other things, like getting ready to go pick up my son, for instance. And I had Trevor Poland's Believe It or Not
Believe it
on.
or not. Yeah, really good.
Yes. And he had one of his more recent videos, possibly even today's video, I'm not sure. It was about why do pastors talk like pastors? And he pointed out, I think it was Pastor Mark Driscoll, but it may have been another pastor. They all kind of look alike to me, but whatever. This particular pastor, he was saying Republican things. And
Right.
Trevor pauses him and he's like, whatever he's preaching, it's not what Jesus talked about. Jesus wanted to heal the sick and feed the poor and so forth. And this man wants to, throw poor people into the dungeon.
Right.
Like,
And
that's not
yeah.
Christianity.
And I mean, I have an incredibly hard time squaring away what prosperity gospel says with what I read in the Bible, right? Like, I have an incredibly hard time, because it's not just the preacher that we're talking about. I mean, the congregation has to be on board with this prosperity gospel as well. And considering everything that Jesus sort of said about blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek kind of thing, everything that he said about it, you have an incredibly hard time going, well, you definitely took the Bible as and Jesus's message as your inspiration for this movement. It seems to be antithetical to it.
It's a perversion. It's an intentional perversion, one could argue, although it's taken several steps and evolutions to get there.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't, I'm not a Christian, so I don't, try to involve myself with judging who has perverted Christianity and who hasn't. But I find it easier to reconcile sort of, the Catholic Church, with all of the harm that they do, which I think vastly outweighs the good. But they at least do try to have alms for the poor and, take care of people who are sick in their own way. I can at least see how they got there. Do you get what I mean? I can at least see, where they got to. The prosperity gospel, I cannot see how you get from Jesus' messages, feed the hungry, clothe the poor, and, take care of the sick, and get to, fuck you, I got money. I don't know how you get there. I'm baffled as to how you get there.
I don't know. However, the hand gestures make me think of another famous story spinner.
What hand gestures? My hand gestures.
The Alex's hand gestures. Somebody mentioned that we keep pausing on hand gestures like this, and it makes me think of the aliens dude. I think Dr. Don from the Alien show. Apparently today he got into a standoff with police, and he is no longer on this earth with us.
What?
I don't know.
Death by cop? What are you talking about? Who's Dr. Don?
I think that's his name. I could be very, very wrong. I don't actually watch Ancient Aliens. Don't tell Maya. She'll excommunicate me from the Weasel cult.
Oh, okay. Well, can't have that.
Yeah. Giorgio Giorgio is it, I don't know where I got the Don thing from, but
yeah,
but no,
Ancient
it was actually
Aliens.
a different person. It was a person named David Wilcox who's on that show.
Oh, okay. Right.
So I just have no idea what I'm talking about, and you shouldn't listen to me.
Okay. Well, I'm going to. I find it hard to do the show without listening to you, Ember. I mean, I could try. It just would be a bit of a weird show, really, if I just completely ignored my co-host and everything they said. That would be strange. Look, just to sort of meta in debate, there's using your hands to talk is really good. It's a really good practice. It works really well. You'll notice that the greatest speakers of all time use these hand gestures, and I do realize I'm using hand gestures as I do this, but there's something about using your body while talking that really emphasizes what you're talking about. And I've found this even when recording, say, a voiceover for one of the few sort of, recorded videos that I've done and things like that. If you actually use your hands and use your body more in doing the voiceover, it will come across. And that sounds really weird. Like, why should it come across? I don't know why, but it does. So when I did the Hovened compilation album ad on my channel, I noticed that it came across so much better if I used my hands and put my entire body into it. And you can see that with people doing voiceovers in like sound booths for movies. They will use their entire body. It actually works. So I don't have a problem with that. And I think that it is something that makes you more watchable on screen for a debate, right? I think it does have that added impetus. So I think that I don't have a problem with hand gestures. I think that it does focus your thoughts. It does allow you, because I mean, communication is not just about what we say. I'm sorry, it isn't. If you believe that, I'm really sorry, you're wrong. Okay, it's also about body language, tone, inflection. Like the actual words that we're saying are such a small part of it. So tone, inflection, cadence, they're all terms which describe things about our communication, none of which is the actual idea being addressed. The trick is to not be taken in by all of those things, right? So these trolls, they will use these really, really condescending ways of talking. They're there to get a response. Obviously Alex has an amazing way of presenting his ideas. They're very, very, very easy to hear, but also very, very deep thought. So I love what Alex is doing. Anyway, I'm a big fan of hand gestures.
Oh, for sure.
And you might want to say you're talking.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Thank you. Well, apparently, I've heard that the Occupy movements have hand gestures instead of people yelling incoherently. They have a system of hand gestures. So, what was really funny was seeing some Christian. Somebody had some footage of some Christian going, "Look, they're doing witchcraft and stuff," when really they've just got hand gestures instead, so they can hear people because their movements are so big. So instead of applause, they'll generally do the hands. So they're all sitting here going this. It just means applause. And like C is like, if they do a C, it means that they have a matter of point to raise. And like all of it's silent. It's actually incredible. It's really amazing to see that humans, we have this problem. We have a massive movement. We have people that all want to be heard, or we have different procedures to do. How do we organize this in a way where it's people not just yelling? And that's what they came up with. Incredible. I'd never heard of that before. And it's absolutely incredible to watch. Like just people organized. I love it when people have a problem, they find a solution, and that solution works brilliantly. It's absolutely fantastic. And then what's hilarious is a Christian will come along and go, yeah, they're doing witchcraft.
Just declaring things without even knowing. I don't like their message, so they must be up to evil.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Talking about like Jesus or the cross, but I consider that as sort of part of the scriptural tradition. You're talking about this story contained in the Gospels, right? And
So
so,
the scriptures have a tradition that culminates in Christ then.
how do you mean?
So you would say that you're either talking about the Bible or you're talking about Christian history. You are wanting to put Jesus and his cross as part of the scriptural tradition.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So it's scripture that has a tradition.
Yeah,
So scripture as a story culminating in Christ and him crucified.
Absolutely, for the Christians, of course, culminating in Christ, yes. And so I think that whichever of those you look at, you sort of run into trouble. Two things I should point out at the outset is, firstly, we can have this conversation remaining agnostic about whether Western values are correct. We don't need to say.
I want to try and steelman Glen's position. Could you argue that the Christian values are a ongoing developing thing as they understand the Bible better? Like, you know what I mean? Like, could you argue that Christianity's values are separate from the Bible and the church?
You could argue that, yes.
Because
there's multiple Christianities, right? Like there's the very regressive kind that's like one man, one woman, yada, yada, yada. And then there's the progressive Christianities that are like Jesus loves everybody. And anyone who says otherwise doesn't know Jesus.
Right. So really I'm talking about sort of a Christian zeitgeist, if you will, the overall general trend of Christianity. So to appeal to a Christianity that is sort of a work in progress, a zeitgeist that changes, well, that's not the Bible and it's not the church, basically, because Alex is trying to sort of say, hey, in order to talk about the history of Christianity, we've got to be talking about the church and the Bible, right? Like that's the only things. But I think that even in early church, you would have denominations or outliers they wouldn't follow the Bible and they wouldn't follow the Catholic Church. They were sort of
early Christianity, especially, like that's why Paul's letters exist, is because every church was doing their own thing. There was no central authority, and there was no Bible.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. But Yeah. So I think maybe there is a third option, that Christianity has its own ethical zeitgeist, if you will, that sort of adapts and changes over time. And I think that's just the consequence of any social construct, right? That I would probably see the overall attitudes of Christians as different than the position of the church. I would probably acknowledge that. Or the different than the churches, for instance.
Yeah, the Catholic Church especially gets held back a lot by the reliance on dogma and so forth. So every social change, somebody has to figure out how to engineer to make that work with the existing structure, which just keeps getting bigger and bigger and more stuffed with rules and exceptions to those rules and exceptions to the exceptions over the centuries.
Yeah. But I mean, with the Catholic Church, that becomes an odd paradigm, doesn't it? It's kind of like the tail wagging the dog, if you will, because the church is the one supposed to lay down these pronouncements of morality to the people. But what it really seems like, at least from the outsider's point of view, is that the church digs its heels in, and then an overwhelming amount of the Christian followers go, hey, that's terrible. And eventually the church will go, yeah, that's terrible, kind of thing. Like, it's always accepted among the members of the church first, and then the church changes its position on it. So it is kind of like, well, it's supposed to be the church with the moral authority, but I think practically the church has as much moral authority as they can muster up until the people really disagree with it, and then it goes, yeah, no, fair call, and just sort of caves in. Maybe I'm straw manning the position, but that's what it seems from the outside.
I don't think so, because it seems that there is a great deal of disagreement over the various child abuse scandals in the Catholic Church, and has been for decades. The membership and external people, but the membership has been up in arms over it for decades, and the
Yeah.
church still hasn't corrected course on that. And that's clearly a huge moral issue. And the
Right.
best defense they have is pointing at all the other churches, because all of them have the same problem.
Well, yeah, and it's weird because I'm looking through debates to try and find something, you know, worthy of being, you know, this magnificent segment. I kind of saw this conservative versus, I know we usually don't do politics, but it was a conservative versus liberal kind of thing. It was Democrat versus Republican, which is better for Gen Z kind of thing. And there were very, very young people. It looked interesting. It was a bit too, it was a bit too stupid, to be honest with you. Like, it was just Democrat talking points versus Republican. Really didn't want to do it, but it was interesting because the young woman who was obviously Republican and very right wing, because her opening statement was, "The problem is we don't have enough God." Basically, that was her opening statement. She was like, "Oh, there's you know, Gen Z is thankfully coming back to Jesus and, you know, is incredibly religious," and I was like, that doesn't sound right. That's not what I've heard. So I looked up the statistics, and no, Gen Z is the most irreligious generation that has ever lived, and they will be really, even if they're not atheist, they tend towards spirituality rather than organized religion. They just don't want the religious institutions. They don't want to go to churches. They don't want a holy book. They just, even if they do believe in something, it's not organized religion. So they are the most irreligious generation that has ever lived by a large degree. It's almost doubled. So I don't know where they're getting this talking point of a revival from. My thought is it's probably their arse, but it's not true.
Well, Fox News, but same thing, really. It's another one of those AstroTurf talking points. Is
right.
Fox surveyed their own viewers, but specifically on one section of Twitter, some shit they did all the p-hacking they possibly could to generate a poll result where they could say, aha, Gen Z is coming back to God. It may not even be Fox News. They could just be cherry picking something they found out in the Twitters.
Maybe,
I don't know, and it doesn't really matter. The point is, someone ginned up some numbers, probably the same sort of sources that came up with the trans identification is collapsing now that Trump has stomped on trans people's necks, which is just as fabricated. They just declare things, and they expect no one to check because their target audience never does check.
It's so easy to check, though. And it's sort of this, it's going to be surprising to a lot of people when Gen Z sort of grow up and they are very irreligious, even if they are, tending towards spirituality or tending towards, something else. I do know that there was a massive draw away from churches with the advent of new atheism kind of thing. Like, there was people were leaving in droves. That has slowed down, but it hasn't stopped. That's the whole thing. Like, this revival is more, hey, we're not bleeding as badly. It doesn't mean you're not bleeding, right? Like, that's not the case. But I find there's solutions to it. And tangents in the chat, everybody. I get you. I'm off on a tangent, per usual. Right, like their whole, the fundamentalist attitude towards it is, oh, well, if we just have more children. And it's like, but the atheists aren't coming from children. They're coming from people that have rationally looked at the religion, done deconstruction, and gone, hey, why do I actually believe this? It seems to just be a method of control over my neck.
It's one more lever of power, as the Seven Mountain Dominionists have helpfully pointed out to us. Religion is just one more lever of control. It's kind of wild, but the vast majority of atheists alive today are former Christians. So you can reproduce as much as you like. You're going to make more of us than more of you. But whatever. It's weirdly, a big part of it is the changing attitudes on war that started to shift around Korea and Vietnam. You know,
Yeah.
we used to be gung-ho, pro-America, yada,
Yeah.
yada. And then we started getting into these horrible, totally unjustifiable wars for purely political reasons. And we kept saying, God is on our side, which is a thing everybody's done as long as there's been religion. But in
Yes. Yeah.
these cases, we didn't see a justification for it. And so every time we get into this sort of military quagmire for political reasons rather than moral justice, and we invoke the name of God, young people who are growing up during that regime, that administration, associate God with unnecessary bloody warfare. And the more they hear people say God says, they picture unnecessary bloody warfare and they want nothing to do with it. And rightly so.
Well, I think that sort of push against these, warfare and unrestricted wars really started in World War II, as we saw the development of the Geneva Convention and the, international laws, the United Nations, and all of these things designed to stop the atrocities that happened in World War II. I think the problem that America had was that it didn't experience the real brunt of World War II. Right? I'm not saying it didn't sacrifice, definitely sacrifice, but the European countries are really the ones that got the real hit from a fascistic totalitarian government that just went in through France, went into Belgium, went into Netherlands, threatened and bombed the crap out of England. I really think that the Russia lost a ton of people. It hasn't learnt its lesson for some reason. I don't know why. But I think that America, it hadn't had that devastating war during World War II, but sort of the wars you mentioned, like Vietnam, was absolutely devastating to the United States. Like, it was a war of attrition. It couldn't afford. It would never end. And it was just a waste. It was just a terrible thing. And I think that the US then started to realize why we shouldn't get. But here we are. We're in another forever war of attrition that looks like it's got no end. So it's wild. It's absolutely wild that we haven't learnt our lesson yet. And there's better ways to deal with Iran than attacking them directly. Way better ways to deal with them.
It's arguably this is the dumbest possible option, but
probably,
we have the dumbest possible option in charge. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it was Sarah. I can't remember her last name. She's like a Navy expert on grand strategy. Right, she worked in the Navy College for Officers, discussing grand strategy. Excellent speaker. I wish I could remember her last name, but anyway, she sort of said, if you want to see the effect that sanctions and economic, actions by the rest of the world has had on a nation, compare North Korea to South Korea. Right. Basically, by the end of the Korean War, they were in the same level of development, the same level, basically. Now, North Korea is so far behind South Korea in terms of development, economic stability, how their people are. It does work. It definitely does work, economic sanctions, but you've got to come together and agree that, hey, this shouldn't be happening. So, her name is on the tip of my tip. I'll look it up.
That freedom of speech and religion, and the LGBT movement, abortion, any of that kind of stuff. We don't even need to see whether it's actually good or bad. The question at hand is whether Christianity has developed popular thinking on these issues.
Sarah Payne is her name. Very, very good speaker. Look her up if you need something to watch on and sort of grand strategy interests you. She has a lot to say and is very, very knowledgeable.
And the second thing to say is, interestingly, I think the most surface level critique people often make of this dominion thesis or air we breathe thesis is that there's nothing unique about Christianity, like, you know, this idea of the golden rule or loving your enemy or all of this kind of stuff crops up in other traditions. And the response to that is to say, okay, but the thesis here is quite limited. We're describing the development of Western values. So of course there might be, you know, Confucian philosophy or Buddhist philosophy, but that's not relevant to the West. But when you say that these developments are unthinkable without Christianity, then I think it does become relevant that important parallels with the kind of ideas that we're talking about here, compassion, caring for the weak, and not allowing the strong to oppress the weak just by right of power, this kind of stuff, do crop up independently of Christianity. I think that raises a big red flag for the thesis that there's something uniquely Christian about that stone.
Why would we look for examples, for instance, of compassion and care for the weak and laud them? And we will find all sorts of examples of compassion and care for the weak in all sorts of cultures around the world. But I think this is part of the dominion thesis. I think this is part of the air we breathe. The very lenses we're using in order to go, I like the word compassion as I see it in Buddhism. I don't like the word dominance, or I don't like Spartan brutality, but I do like Confucianist desire to live in right relationship with your elders, right? Like, what are the lenses that we are looking through in order to cite other moral sources out there? And I would say those are being profoundly Christianized.
Yeah, so there's this question of like, you know, are we looking upon these other traditions and judging them as good or bad? I'm interested in a slightly more neutral question of just their existence.
Yeah, so what he's saying is that other civilizations have come up with these concepts, even though they had nothing to do with Christianity. I mean, if you're talking about the golden rule, which basically, if you're unfamiliar with that, it's basically do unto others as they do unto you, right? Like that sort of is the golden rule. It's reciprocity is how it's described in scientific terms. It's basically treating other people like you would like to be treated, essentially. There's a better version of that, which is don't do to people what you wouldn't want done to you. It's the negative version. It's actually slightly better. And that version is actually in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and the slightly superior version. So that arose completely independent of Christianity, right? Like it's not
hard
unique.
to figure out.
It's not unique to Christianity, you know, and Christianity and Christians will say, hey, that came from Christian. It really didn't. There's many versions of that found in civilizations all throughout the world without Christianity, and better versions too. So it's not that Christians didn't promote that value within our society. It's the claim that we necessarily needed Christianity for that value to arise. Because, you know, you're sort of going, well, we don't have a counterfactual for this. And it's like, well, we don't have a direct counterfactual for Western society, but what we do have is that same thing arising that is a counterfactual without Christianity, right? So if we can point to something like that and say, yes, but it did arise in ancient Egypt with nothing to do with Christianity, then that is a counterfactual. That it is most likely for that to arise because it has arisen place after place after place.
The fact that they're there means that at the very least that kind of thinking can't be uniquely indebted to Christianity. I think it's also worth pointing out that, like, you know, the Greco-Roman period is a particularly brutal time in human history. But so I would say, so you could say, you know, Christianity enters into this Roman culture, which is extremely brutal, and it sort of civilizes it, if you will. Christians are rescuing the discarded infants from the dustbins of the streets and raising them in orphanages, I suppose, essentially, and this kind of stuff. I think it's true, of course, but I also think that the Jewish culture
that is true. I mean, it could be true, but I don't think there's a lot of information on that.
Well, I don't think so, but I will say that I think that Christianity definitely had better ideas than the Roman civilization that was before them. The Roman civilization was incredibly hierarchical. It was basically, you know, it had devolved into sort of a totalitarian system rather than a republic at that point. You know, you had the Caesar, who was supposed to be placed in power in times of war, just not giving up power, right? Like that's essentially what happened. It was supposed to be the Senate that held all the power. And it seems to be a problem with democracies, even limited democracies like Rome, is that a person will convince people that they need a totalitarian leader because things have gone off the rails, and that person won't give up power. I can't imagine where that parallel lies in today's society. Couldn't possibly imagine.
It's a mystery.
It's a mystery. But the Roman civilization was pretty damn brutal. If you weren't a citizen of Rome, you had very, very limited rights. You couldn't just, you had to become a citizen to obtain these rights. The people in power were pretty horrible to the people lower down. Like if you're a slave, you were treated abysmally, absolutely abysmally. Now, there's ways you could work yourself out of slavery, but that doesn't make it right. And the idea behind the Roman civilization was that if you were a successful senator with a lot of power, you could do anything you wanted, and the gods had favored you. Your beseechment to Jupiter meant that you were in charge, and everything was right with the world. I think that Christianity had a better idea. The question is, would that idea have come along without Christianity? And I think that it would. I think that the idea that the poor should not be oppressed by the powerful just because they're powerful. I think that idea has come up multiple times in multiple different contexts, in multiple civilizations. Even if we look at something like the Code of Hammurabi, right? Like it basically has, just because you're powerful, don't oppress the less powerful. Don't do that. And I think the cynical part of me says that it's because people in power know that there's a lot more people without power than there is getting power, right? And that's something that modern liberalism is supposed to address. It's supposed to say, hey, it is the power of the people that ultimately has that absolute power. It doesn't come from God, it doesn't come from these places. It comes from the power of the people, essentially.
Right. It's never a god reaching down and whispering in a ruler's ear, you need to start treating your people better. It's always the threat of losing power. Like, the Code of Hammurabi is a great example. The earlier codes that preceded it, although in some of them, the steles that have the code on them, will include something like, let the gods see that I'm carrying out my duties as a good ruler and be remembered for all time for it, sort of thing. But it's clearly not coming from the gods. And with Rome, you've got stuff like the councils that produced the 12 tables, which were basically big freaking Bill of Rights looking things set out in front of the Senate. They weren't so much rights as procedures. Different legally formalized mechanisms for redress of grievances and how certain things shall be carried out to formalize the law for all citizens. Similar idea, this stuff keeps popping back up no matter which religion is dominant or any.
Yes.
Ride in the Old Testament, Israelite conquests of Canaan, for example, is also an incredibly brutal kind of time as we recognize it today, and Christianity also enters into that. And so in the same way that the Christian wants to see this developmental trajectory, they say, okay, I know that our origin story in like the Jewish exodus from Egypt and then the immediate enslavement, the immediate like genocide of Canaanite tribes and this kind of stuff is really, really bad and brutal. It sort of flourishes towards Christianity. I think that if you ground Enlightenment values in particularly like a Greek tradition, which you could say that a few thousand years ago was extremely brutal, we can say that, well, yeah, but it flourished into something quite nice. So the brutality of the Roman world that Christianity entered into, I think is mirrored by the brutality of the Jewish world into which Christianity entered on the Christian story, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I get what he's saying. He's basically also saying that, just because the Roman world was brutal, they contributed a great deal to our modern ideas of a republic, right? Like, so just because a civilization was brutal and horrible. And, if you're talking about Western values, you've got to mention democracy. Democracy did not come from Christianity. It came from ancient Greece. Now, just because the ancient Greek world was brutal, You know, even just within Greece, the city-states fighting among one another, it was really, really brutal. That doesn't mean that we can't take something of value from that society and say, hey, let's apply that to today, because they had limited democracy where, you know, you had to be a citizen of the city-state, you had to be a landowner in order to vote, etc., etc., etc. But their ideas on it were revolutionary at the time, and we base our modern democracy on it. I don't, you know, see that, hey, other civilizations were brutal is really an answer to say why all of our Western values came from Christianity. Christianity didn't have an idea of democracy. You follow the leader that has been appointed by God, right? Like Jesus had nothing to say on democracy. He didn't say, hey, if you want to follow me, you've got to vote for me. You know, like he didn't say that.
Yeah, it was
right?
all about the kingdom and my chosen leader, and all these people will be little leaders to go set up churches and all that. Like, it's very power structure. It's very top-down power structure.
Yeah, definitely wasn't based around our modern ideas of Western democracy. Absolutely not. So I think there's a number of things that I would point to that are integral to Western society, values which are integral to Western society, that Christianity definitely did not give us. Okay, Christians might have written about it. Sorry?
That Christianity, in fact, is opposed to, or they're opposed to Christianity, depending on your perspective.
Well, I mean, modern Christianity wouldn't be opposed to it, but Christians back in the past would have been opposed to it. Like, if you suggested democracy to someone in the Middle Ages, like, you know, the church and the king in the Middle Ages, they would probably behead you. You know, like, that is a dangerous thing to have. Hey, shouldn't the power be with the ordinary people and, you know, elect people into the kingship and the you know, leader of the church? I think the Catholic Church didn't start out doing elections for the Pope. Did the Catholic Church start doing papal election? I thought that was relatively recently.
It could have been. I mean, Vatican I, Vatican II, even. I don't think it's that recent, but yeah.
So they started doing it in 1059. The conclave, the locked room system with the smoke, was introduced in 1274. So yeah, 1,000 years after they started, they kind of, you know, or once that happened, you know, almost 1,000 years, they started actually introducing some form of democracy into the church. So, fair enough.
But it was the Jews who, as well, within Roman society, were appalled by the brutality of Rome, by their practices of infanticide, by their practices of pederasty, which the Jews called paidophoria instead of pederasty, which means not child love, but child destruction. I think they found the Roman military valor to be really quite completely disjunctive of you know what the Jewish scriptures were saying all the time. I think when you're talking about that Old Testament war of Israel going up against Canaan, you're talking about a real David going up against Goliath, circling around a town and chanting after 7 days, and then the walls come down. They circumcise themselves before the battle. They are undermining themselves in every way. Now, there's all sorts of...
What? Does he actually... it sounds like he believes that story, that they marched around the walls and then blew a trumpet and the walls fell down. I don't think that literally happened, my guy. I'm really sorry, but I don't think that literally happened. I think that is a story. And I don't think it was, like, when you say the war against Canaan, it wasn't like all of Canaan combined and came after Israel. No, they picked off tribes. They went up against the Midianites and the Ammonites. Right? They didn't just take on the entire lot of them. It was against specific tribes that they didn't like, or they wanted their land more specifically.
it's quite likely that that sort of behavior is what caused. I mean, there were kingdoms, there were empires by then, but every once in a while you'd end up with a band of city-states, and inevitably some angry group of conquerors would come through and pick them off one by one because they didn't stand united. And from that point forward, those people and their descendants were like, we really need to be part of a bigger empire because crap. This needs to stop happening.
Eventually the Assyrians came and conquered them, and then the Babylonians came and conquered the Assyrians and then exiled them from Israel to Babylon. And then
some of them.
Well, some of them, yeah. Then the Persians came and destroyed the Babylonians, absolutely completely. Like, they absolutely annihilated the Babylonians and sort of released all of the Israeli people. But and then the Greeks came and destroyed the Persians. I mean, to say that they were never really a major player in the area is an understatement. And I mean, the Greeks, they had city-states, but the one thing that they did is when anybody outside of those city-states threatened them, they would all band together. So, they sort of had a loose alliance that... Yeah, it's a bit more complicated than that, but yes. Yeah.
There are all sorts of aspects of the book of Joshua that make us swallow hard. There are all sorts of aspects that put a lump in all our throats, but they wouldn't have put a lump in a Roman throat. They wouldn't have put a lump in Marcus Aurelius' throat. They wouldn't have put a lump in Muhammad's throat. They wouldn't have put a lump in Sun Tzu's throat. They do put a lump in both our throats.
They might put a lump in Aristotle's throat.
But if the Canaanites could become natural slaves, then that is a just cause of war for Aristotle.
Yeah, but Aristotle has some depiction of a kind of just war theory in which, for a start, he thinks that the military should only be used defensively; it should not be used for conquest. And so I think that he would look
unless they are by nature slaves and can be ruled in that way.
Before we go too much further in this fascinating discussion,
what?
I'm not. I am completely unfamiliar with the Aristotelian ideas on warfare, I got to admit, but they should only be used defensively. There's something sort of very Greek about that, and the Greek mentality of, hey, this is the mother Greece, and we protect Greece, not necessarily going out and attacking other nations. I mean, the Persians only got wiped by the Greeks because they had the temerity to attack Greece, kind of thing. They, I believe Darius at first got into an argument and attacked them, and then Xerxes, made famous by the 300 kind of thing, attacked them, and Greece turned around and kicked their ass. But, sort of Greece didn't do a lot of these war of conquest, going out and getting territory. So,
Oh, no. Okay, so I looked up Aristotle's view on slave nature. It doesn't apply to peoples or populations, it applies to individuals. He believed that some people lack the intellectual capacity for full rational deliberation, possessing only enough reason to understand commands, but not to reason out a properly considered course of action on their own.
Right.
And therefore, it was to their benefit to be ruled over by someone with a fully functioning cognitive array. And therefore, slavery was beneficial for the slave in that the master could take care of them and make sure that they live their lives in a good fashion so that they don't hurt themselves and that sort of thing, which is really, really gross. But a lot of these ideas were reversed in polarity, and they were saying, because you're a slave, you are intellectually deficient, rather than you're intellectually deficient, so you must be enslaved.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of these philosophical ideas, I think a lot of them, when the rubber hits the road and, you look at the practicality and implementation of them, they're just not going to work. Like, for instance, communism seems really good on paper. It seems like a great ideology. It seems like it would be fantastic. It doesn't work in practice because there's always going to be somebody who takes the reins, the Communist Party, and basically turns it into a horror show. Right, I think the same is true with this benevolent slavery. I think there's no way to implement it where it will not instantly corrupt into mass enslavement of people that aren't being helped, that are in fact making money for the slave owner, even though that entire system is detrimental to everybody in the society. Like, it will destroy the lower class, it will destroy the middle class, and all you have are slaves and owners, basically, at the end of the day. So yeah, I mean, look, you may disagree with me about communism. You might say, hey, it can work. I do not see how that can actually work. I don't see how, because every single time it's been tried, it has turned into an absolute nightmare. So I don't know. You know, if you want to be an idealist and say, hey, it can work, fine. I'd like to see some practical implementation which has worked, because it doesn't seem to.
Well, there's a lot of tangents buried in there. There have been some successful implementations of it as an economic system rather than a political system. But even those, you'd have to put so many asterisks and qualifications on that they don't even really look like pure communism anymore. But that's neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is that any idea can be pure in philosophical form, but has to be implemented by humans. And inevitably, some asshole's going to come along and try to abuse any system for their own personal gain, no matter how pure the intentions.
Yeah. Because sort of the problem is that power always corrupts. So any government holding
a lot of historians say that power is more like an acid. Power reveals. If a person is corrupt, it will reveal that. But on the off chance you have a person who is not corrupt, power will reveal that too.
Well, see, that's the problem.
The non-corrupt people don't seek power.
Well, that's the problem, though, Ember. And plus, people don't live forever. So I'm talking about over time. Any power in a family or a party or one single consolidation of power will corrupt over time. Even if it's not one generation, a few generations down the track, they will. So we have over time this, and I understand what they mean, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think it is very prescient that if you're given absolute power, you will do things in the best, or, you know, even if you are the most pure-hearted person, you'll do things in the best interests of people. But over time, like, will your children do the same, and will their children do the same, and will their children's children's do the same?
Well, that's one of the corrupting influences, is that heritability. It shouldn't be inherited that way, because it's an individual thing whether a person is worthy of power or the right personality type, intellectual composition, however you want to phrase it. It's an individual thing. It's not a heritable trait. So you'd have to find a fair way to select a new leader to come after, not just pass it down. Once you start inheriting it, you're inviting corruption, you know?
Well, the issue is that when people get into power, they generally want the best for their children. So I think that people generally do change, you know, the laws and circumstance to give it to their children because they want the best for it. You know, like, that is something that generally happens. I think that you know, and parents always think the best of their children, right? Like, that's always something that happens. They're like, well, my children are good people, even when they're not. It's very rare to see somebody go, well, my child is a piece of crap that shouldn't in no way get anywhere near power, right? Like,
people
there
have
is
a
that
great deal of trouble with honest evaluation when they have a built-in bias. You're supposed to be biased in favor of your children.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that a better way than communism, which is a party having absolute power on behalf of the people, is democracy, where we spread that power out between everybody, right? Everybody has a tiny bit of power that, when conglomerated, you can change the government without a violent revolution. All right, that's the ideal of democracy. It is currently contending with populism and propaganda and, you know, these levers of power, these levers of influence, which are undermining it. And I totally get it. There's massive problems where that's concerned, but it is better than one communist party having all of the power and deciding everything on everybody's behalf, which slowly turns in on what's best for the party rather than what's best for the people.
Whoever the party may be. But yeah, there's so much all cross-connected in that, but it's a little bit off from Christianity. Like we're on enough of a sidetrack that I'm not quite sure how we got here.
I'm sorry. Tangents in the chat. I'll throw some in.
Sort of. This has been really helpful for sketching out, though, what I initially asked, which was Glenn to sort of say, can I summarize? Can I summarize? But what I'm hearing here is that you're satisfied that yeah, you got it right, Glenn. I have a problem potentially with the Bible, especially the Old Testament, being the source of some of these moral values, as you say.
Also, I should say the New Testament as well.
Okay, right. Well, we can come to that. But then you're also wanted to add, and that's where we've been having this conversation, that it's perfectly, it appears to you that these same aspects of morality can appear in other civilizations and cultures. They're not necessarily unique to Christian sort of culture that you see popping up, but that all cultures have had, if you like, their barbaric history.
Oh yeah,
which has and so how are we to say it's not necessarily a flourishing from Greek culture that might equally lend us some of these?
But to be clear, I don't want to undermine the influence of Christianity. I mean, if the thesis is just that Western civilization has been greatly influenced by Christianity, it's like,
of course,
yeah, of course.
Yeah, that isn't up for debate. Absolutely. It really annoys me if atheists go, oh, well, Christianity had nothing to do with the development of the Western world. Like that is a claim right there. You cannot argue that it has not influenced the modern world. For the better or worse, well, that's hard to tell.
Yeah, like you can discuss the degree to which it's had influence, but I mean,
right.
Everything has, you know, this random goose that crossed the road in 1917 had an influence on the course of history.
Right.
Not a detectable one, but it did, you know. It's
yeah, I get what you're
how
saying.
much
Yeah.
influence. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, there's been a ton of stuff which has had a huge influence on modern society. I would argue, though, that the Enlightenment had more influence on modern society than Christianity did. But I think that if you live in a area where you're going to church and you're you're listening to your pastor, and you know everybody you know is religious, and you're living within that sort of echo chamber of religiosity, you would probably disagree. I mean, I don't. I live in a multi
multicultural, diverse.
Yeah,
society.
multicultural, diverse society where you're just as likely to meet somebody from India as you are from sort of European descent, or somebody from Africa than you are. Like it's just not. It's not something that really impacts on my day to day, and so I don't think the influence. I think the Enlightenment, where we're looking at, well, what are the reasons and can we rationally explain why things happen, have influenced the modern society way more than Christianity has. But depends on your experience, I guess.
Your mileage may vary.
Your mileage may vary, yeah. But I think there is a tendency for Christians to be in this echo chamber of, everything is from Christianity, everything's about Christianity. And I think that they get sort of fooled into living their life like there's nothing else outside of Christianity. And so that sort of begs the question, well, what the hell am I doing? Most of my life does not revolve around Christianity. I'm sorry, it doesn't.
It's a weird kind of reductive thinking that seems to permeate a lot of things. And I'm not entirely sure if it's a thing from Christianity or that some forms of evangelical Christianity fundamentalist Christianity have taken advantage of, because we see it in so many places, from the people who can't wrap their head around that there could be a woman doctor, to the people who are insisting that there's only two genders, two sexes, yada yada yada, and it's obviously demonstrably not true, but they're insisting on something that has no connection to reality because they live in an echo chamber on these things, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Of course. But the idea, as you worded it earlier, Glenn, in fact, you sort of put it more strongly than I tried to characterize your thesis, that these kind of developments would be unthinkable without Christianity. Perhaps we can dig into what
certain post-Christian developments are unthinkable without the road that they've gone through that is Christendom.
So maybe we could talk about what those are.
Well,
I mean, I don't know what you want to say.
We want to get to some specifics, and so that's a good thing to do. I mean, I think we've heard it, I'm sure it'll come through as well as we talk, Glenn, that, as you elaborate the way that this has flowed out, as you see it, these modern values of kindness, equality, freedom, consent that we're going to be focusing on from
kindness, equality, freedom, consent.
Like from Christianity? I mean, maybe like first century Christianity, but modern?
Look, I don't doubt that Christianity has an influence on what people see as kindness, right? Like I would say, hey, yeah, so kindness, charity, definitely it has had an influence on that. But I think Alex's point that, hey, that arose in other societies, like Buddhist societies where Buddhist monks go and give things to the poor and try to take care, that arose without Christianity. So, and sort of taking care of the poor. And I do not doubt that Christians would try, because, I mean, Islam has a very, very rich history of taking care of the poor, right? Like taking care of your community. I'm sure Christians would say, hey, that's from us as well, because, it piggybacks off the Old Testament, which it does, like it absolutely does. But I'm not sure you could say that that's Christian influence so much. They acknowledge the New Testament, but they don't think Christ is a god. It gets tricky because I don't think that Islam and the Quran is an addition to the New Testament. I think it's an addition to the Old Testament.
Right. Well, sort of. It's tricky because it comes from the same sorts of oral tradition stories that gave rise to the New Testament, but these continued to develop in an oral tradition for a couple more hundred years before they weren't even written down then. It was just Muhammad said stuff and people wrote that down,
Yeah. So I think they're both sort of additions, like fan fictions of the Old Testament, or additions, and they're not fan fiction, but additions to the Old Testament rather than the Quran is based upon the New Testament kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a Christian viewing of things, the same way they look at the Book of Mormon as like an add-on to the New Testament. It's more New Testament, which in the case of Mormonism is true, because that's how Joseph Smith wrote it, is the whole New Testament is true, and then also this. But yeah, it's really more of a separate offshoot of, it's not even directly from Judaism. It's mixed with some folk traditions of the region Muhammad grew up in.
Yeah. Yep.
Those Christian origins and the way that permeated the whole of our culture. Just one question before we leap into some specifics. It has become a very popular thesis, interestingly. It's not that Tom Holland was not the first person to point this out, but suddenly everyone seems to be talking about the Tom Holland thesis. And you have people like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who you've both interviewed at different points, I think almost at an intellectual level, convinced about the value of Christianity because of suddenly starting to see that we can't sustain a culture like ours without the Christian story at the bottom of it. And I'd just be interested in just at the beginning, before we get...
We can't sustain a culture like ours without Christianity. I would disagree vehemently. I think that one of the things we've really got to acknowledge is that our current situation in the United States with Project 2025, that is the Christian push. That is the Christian utopia that they're headed towards, where the state is basically furthering the Christian agenda, if you will, the Christian values, what the Christians want. And I don't think we can let the Christians off the hook for Project 2025 and Project 2026 reducing us to this absolute nightmare. You know, we have aggressive wars breaking out. We have the economy being vastly harmed. We have people's rights being just abused. We have people being shot in the street. Like, this is the Christian utopia. This is the product of Christian thinking. And I'm really sorry if you I'm Christian and I oppose it. I laud that. I appreciate that. I do. But we have to point out that it wasn't atheists or secularists that went, hey, we're going to send troops out to find anybody with a brown skin color and drag them away to concentration camps. Okay, that wasn't atheists and it wasn't secularists. It was somebody who claims to be a Christian, and his agenda was written by people in the Heritage Institute who ostensibly are a fundamentalist Christian institution.
So they say, and it's the Heritage Foundation.
Sorry, yeah, you're right.
Detail. Yeah. It depends on what he means by a story like, because I'm reminded of Daniel Quinn, who wrote that humans collectively need a story to be in. We're myth makers. We're constantly trying to figure out where we came from, how we got here, what we're doing here, what's our relationship to the gods or nature of the universe, what's our purpose, and what is our destiny. These are the three phases of mythology, and collectively they form the cultural story. And that's what gets reinforced constantly every day without ever being spoken about. It's just there. It's the narrative. It's the story that you're expected to be in and take part in. And one of the dangers of these conquery flavored cultures is they believe that their story can only be true, it can only be brought to that destiny when every other possible story is wiped out and every human being is forced to live in their narrative. Jesus will only come back when the whole world is Christian, sort of deal. And those are extremely dangerous. They're sort of a metastasized offshoot, but that doesn't have to be the flavor of story that we're stuck in. I mean, individually, we don't even need a story. You can live your life perfectly fine without that kind of narrative. But culturally, to sustain a civilization, you have to have some idea of what the purpose of your civilization is. What are you trying to do together? What destiny are you hoping to achieve? And it's easier to anchor that in a mythology of creation and Genesis and the will of the gods and all that shit. But you do need to have something to point at to get the people to go along with you, to function in the society together. And so what does he mean by a story like Christianity? Because we could have a very different story do the same thing functionally.
Right. And it's just so the idea that atheism has nothing to offer in way of a story, etc., etc. I get that. That's not what it's for. I think that we do need to present more of a pathway to working towards something, right? And so part of my channel, what I'm about is sort of saying, hey, we do have a pathway working towards something. And that is that it's important to understand that, our fellow humans are not our enemy. They're never our enemies are things like disease and the chaos of the universe around us and things like that. Like, rogue asteroids. You know what? I learned the other day about rogue planets. I mean, if you want to hear something horrifying, just a planet that's just flying through the universe, not around any sun, just being yeeted out there. And there is a non-zero chance, all right, it's incredibly low and because of the vastness of space, but a planet could just come shooting out of the Oort cloud and hit us. Like, it's just wild, right? You know, and that is kind of the thing that I would suggest is what we should be working towards defeating, because, you know, attacking humans is self-defeating. It is self-defeating. So yeah, I
Humans
look.
are not actually our enemy. I mean,
Yeah,
some humans make themselves our enemy, but it's not an
right.
innate natural thing. We
Yeah.
have bigger fish to fry, as it were.
Yes. So that's sort of the story that we should be promoting, is that, you know, and sort of people go, and Christians sort of say, hey, if the heat death of the universe is the outcome, then why try at all? And my answer would be like, my guy, that's billions and billions and billions of years. Why don't we see how far we can get? It's the same as, you know, people that are in a situation that is sort of a no-win situation, right? Like, you are in a situation where you think that's your time, it's all over. The whole thing is to try as hard as possible to survive, even though it looks hopeless. Because what else are you going to do? Like, you don't just lay down and take it. You try as hard as possible. That's the whole point.
Coincidentally, there's
Yeah.
another story that is based on both those things, rogue planets and the human nature to try to fight for survival against all possibilities. It's a story
Yes.
from like the 1920s or something, when we were just starting to enter the atomic age, but nobody really knew what you could actually do with atomics. The idea was that an astronomer in South America or South Africa had discovered a rogue planet coming in from the ecliptical south, and everybody in the highest echelons of government was panicking. But because it was, you know, the 1920s, a pilot had to fly to South Africa, pick up the photographic plates and fly them back to London and not tell anyone. And then the royal astronomers had to examine them and make a determination, yada, yada, yada. TLDR, there was a rogue planet coming in. It was going to fuck up the Earth. What are we going to do about it? Well, they calculated its orbit, and it would miss the Earth barely the first time passed. It would smash the moon, but the Earth would survive. But that's the first time passed. Then it would circle the sun and meet us 6 months around on the other side, and then the Earth would be destroyed. But here's the thing: this big Uranus-sized planet happened to have a moon roughly the size of the Earth. And as it got closer, they trained telescopes on it, and they discovered that it had like frozen cities and shit. It happened to be like 20th century technology, but there was no one living there because it had been in interstellar space for who knows how long. It was, everything was dead. But they had cities, and it was like, it was clearly suitable for humans. And the way the gravitational interactions would work is when this Uranus-sized planet smashed the Earth on the other side of the sun, its moon would get ejected into Earth's orbit. So if they could just figure out how to transfer humans from the Earth to that moon during that period of crossover, humanity could survive. And that's the story of the book. Is the first half is sorting all this out, and the second half is doing the thing with the magic science atomics.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
And I love all of these, you know, sort of hypotheticals kind of thing of humans progressing beyond Earth kind of stuff. I think that, you know, if we can just avoid destroying ourselves, we're really just a young species just setting out. Anything could happen. Now, I don't know if we'll survive or not, but you know, let's give it a shot. Let's give it a shot. Why not? But the problem that I have is that when we run into problems that seem existential, like climate change, for instance, people who believe in God will ignore them completely or sort of fight against them with the belief that God's going to save them. And I don't believe in a God. I don't think a God is coming to save us. I don't think anybody's coming to save us. I think it's up to us. And that's the big problem that I have, that we have very real problems that, you know, throughout our human history, I don't think God solved any of these problems. He didn't cure leprosy. He didn't stop cancer. He didn't, you know, do anything about all these problems. So even if there is a God, why would you believe he's going to save humanity in some way? I don't know. Faith, I guess. I don't know. It's weird.
I mean, if depending on the God, if you believe the Bible, the only thing he's promised is that he's going to destroy everything even harder next time. You know?
Maybe, yeah. And then afterwards, there's going to be some sort of utopia. I don't see the evidence for that.
Yeah.
But imagine that story with a rogue planet and all the Christians, they were just going, no, this is just God's promise and we'll go to heaven afterwards. You know what I mean? Like that's my issue. It's like, well, we could do something about this and survive, or we could just sit back and accept it going, well, it's God's will. And I know which side of that I'm going to be on. I'm going to be the one fighting and doing something about it. It's just heartbreaking.
About this story, and I believe there's sequels about the people trying to make their new life on this new earth brought to them through the new heaven. You know, it's like it's sort of biblical. It's not explicitly put that way,
right,
but it parallels a lot of what you could interpret the Bible says will happen.
Yeah. I do find it hard to believe that a rogue planet the size of Neptune would smash into the Earth and release its own moon perfectly to give the same orbit as Earth.
That's a little weird.
Yeah.
That might be miraculous if it
That
did
might
happen.
be a miracle. That might be a miracle. Absolutely. Absolutely.
To the specifics, your sense of where that's come from, why perhaps someone who was at one time the most famous female atheist in the world has had this kind of about turn that seems to be so linked to the need for Christianity as a foundational story for our culture and that kind of thing. Maybe start with you, Ben, and then come to Alex.
I think in one sense, the Tom Holland thesis is unremarkable and quite modest in that Christianization is 20 centuries of Christianization has had a profound impact on our moral sensibilities, and it's even had an impact on the way we see other sources of moral intuition in the West. I think that's actually quite a modest position to take on things and quite widespread. Whether you're against Christianity and you're Nietzsche and you think, yes, Christianity has done a number on us all and it's a bad thing, or whether you are agnostic about these sorts of things like a Tom Holland is, or a Larry Seidentop, or a...
I suppose I'm asking, why is it resonating so much then? It's not new necessarily, and it's fairly modest in its claim, but it seems like everyone's picking it up suddenly, and I wonder, well, what's changed for it to become so resonant?
I think he wrote it in 2019, and I think
fundamentalism has come back in a big way, I think. It is a fundamentalist position that Christianity is responsible for everything good in society and we can't do it without it. It seems like a sort of position of faith rather than of actual demonstration, though. I really think that the Enlightenment opposed Christian thinking at the time, and it absolutely is responsible for a lot of the things that we see as Western values today. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, right? You didn't used to have freedom of speech. Like if you went, hey, God's an asshole, you would be quickly burnt at the stake. Like that's not freedom of speech. So I think that there's nowhere in the Bible that sort of says, hey, freedom of speech is fine. You know, I don't know where that paragraph is where it says, hey, no matter what somebody is saying, do not attack them or, you know, discourage them from speaking kind of thing. I don't know where that was, you know, where that is in the Bible. Someone pointed out if there is, but I don't know where it is.
If he'd written it 20 years earlier, that's when kind of the end of history was kind of being proclaimed as this, okay, we win, modern liberal Western democracies are the future, everybody will get on board, and it's plain sailing from here on in. And I think that there was the kind of the conceit that there's a post-war consensus, prosperity is on the up, stability is on the up, peace is reigning. And you could almost believe that everything's getting better in a kind of a Steven Pinker sort of sense. And I think in the last 20 years...
Oh, you take Steven Pinker out of your mouth. So Steven Pinker has written about the greatest happiness principle, right? Like, so, like just stability and order does not necessarily equal good, right? Like, you would say that a brutal dictatorship which is run as a strict regime is more orderly than, say, a secular nation with people with all different opinions, and they can say whatever they want. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily better, especially when you're considering the happiness of the people. So I don't know why he would equate the two. It seems like he's doing a little bit of conflation here. Because I will not disagree that Christianity brought order to a disordered world, right? Like, so in the fall of the Roman Empire, Christianity was more based in the Eastern Roman Empire with Constantine and the Eastern Orthodoxy. But that doesn't mean it was necessarily having that system is better than, say, another system, like, for instance, a modern Western system. I don't think so. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Having a more open interpretation, the ability to question things, the ability to follow science where it leads. I'm a little sidetracked and smirky about it because Steven Pinker happens to be the one who started that whole kerfuffle between Dawkins and the Freedom from Religion Foundation when he went on that epic crash out about gender. And led to Lawrence Krauss and the other Epstein squad writing that book, The War on Science, about how canceled they are rather than Trump's actual war on science. So it's just the privilege, the elitism. Oh, I wish I had. Maya has so many good terms for this sort of thing. It's like the rich boy audacity of how dare you question me while simultaneously proposing that we have a more egalitarian system.
Yes.
It's a weird time to be alive.
It definitely is.
Well, the 20 years from there till 2019, we've gone through some incredible upheavals and a lot of people questioning just how obvious liberal Western democracy, democratic ideals are. I mean, one reason for that might be 9/11 and then the 9/11 wars, in which, okay, let's just remove the Taliban and Afghanistan will become an egalitarian utopia, or we'll just remove Saddam Hussein and modern Western liberal democracy will just...
Yeah, but, I mean, liberal democracy doesn't really have anything to do with interventionist wars, right? Like, so liberal democracy, it doesn't say we should automatically push that on everybody, right? It's the best way that we've found so far to organize society, and has led to incredible wealth generation, productivity, a peace that, considering when you compare it to Europe when the church was in charge, there's just wars all constantly, because
wars and serfs and plagues.
Right, they could never agree on anything. People were heretics. They would have infighting. There would be nations attacking another nation, sometimes with papal approval, sometimes with, it was an absolute mess. The idea of liberal democracy, I think that has to be accepted by a people. It can't be forced on them, right? So when the first sort of liberal democracy really got started, which was the French Revolution, that turned very badly very quickly, right? You had the cult of reason as started by the sort of atheist people, and that quickly got supplanted by the cult of the supreme being, which was the deist under Robespierre, or Robespierre. And he sort of did all the murderizing of everybody, including, anybody that disagreed with him, whether they were atheist or Catholic or even just Christian. Like, he really did all of that.
It's happening.
Sorry?
It's weird how that keeps happening. I'm thinking there's certain groups at a fairly lower scale, all over history, all over time, including right now, and in a certain corner of YouTube, where certain people like to set themselves up as cult leaders and then try to metaphorically or literally execute people, regardless of their belief system, for the capital offense of not agreeing with them.
Yes. But the thing is that France never went and attacked their neighbors, right, during this period. What happened was that Austria and a few other countries saw the way that France was heading, and the nobles went, oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. Because what they saw was the church and the aristocracy, the two main people in charge of society, being taken out by the will of the people, and they did not want that to stand. So the idea that you can sort of force it on from outside isn't how liberal democracy spread. That isn't how it spread. So, I think this is sort of pointing to failed American empire and sort of going, oh, well, that's a failure of liberal democracy. Well, no, it's not. It's like using a socket wrench to try to get at a nut that it doesn't fit, and then going, well, it's something wrong with the tool. No, it's not. No.
Clearly, I should use a hammer for this.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Rain, and I think we've had to wrestle in lots of different ways with those geopolitical issues. I think de-Christianization has happened in America in a quite profound way. 40 million Americans left church.
Sorry?
He was saying de-Christianization has happened in America, and I'm like, we're working on it.
Yeah, I think by about probably by about 2050, I think America will be not majority Christian. I think by the latest it'd probably be to 2070, but I think by 2050, I think that Christianity will be a minority. I don't think there will be a majority kind of thing. It will be separated between Muslims, Christians, things. Before this entire Project 2025, I had stated I am worried about the reaction of Christians to losing power in America, and what we have seen is a complete crap show. This entire thing is just awful,
This century, and there's kind of a sense of, with institutional Christianity and believing Christianity in some senses in the West in the rearview mirror, I think there's been much more of a sense of people missing what they once had, and the Dominion thesis sort of naming that. I think at low.
Well, I think they've been convinced by nostalgia that what Christians had was somehow way better than their modern lives, and I don't think that's been the case. I think they've been conned by saying, oh, remember the good old days when it was all Christian? I don't think it was the good old days. I don't think it was as grand as, your leaders are pointing out. I think that was pretty crappy, in fact.
Mm-hmm. In so many ways. Like, we've been through this 3 times now with the various election cycles where they keep saying return to greatness. Well, which time period was great exactly? And they can't agree because everybody has different nostalgia, and that's all it is an appeal to nostalgia.
Yep.
The tide, you sort of see what the sea had done in the sense that at high tide you have no idea about the shaping influence of the sea. Low tide actually might reveal
that. Low tide being a metaphor drawn from Matthew Arnold's Sea of Fate that has gone out, and only then do we see
the melancholy long withdrawing roar.
How that Sea of Fate shaped our.
And of course, tides come back in again. That's
so it's been said.
That's the fun sort of rejoinder, isn't it? But even if they don't, my point is, at low tide there are things that you see what lies beneath, and I think people have seen.
I think this is a terrible analogy. I think you can't sort of say, hey, at low tide you see all the things that you missed out on, kind of thing. I think this is a terrible analogy because I think that there's been a lot of propaganda of how great it used to be when Christians were in charge, and I think that I think that from the start of America, at least, Christians weren't really in charge. It was set up as a secular government. It was set up to be independent of any religion. But I mean, they probably knew that nearly all religious followers, the ones that weren't atheist, deist were Christians, but I don't think that it was set up with that in mind. I think they set it up to be, because they had come from the English monarchy, where the church and the state very much worked hand in hand.
The various churches with the various states. Remember, there was that big issue with the Anglicans, who were still loyal to the Church of England, even though they'd separated from the political rule of England.
Yes.
There were the Methodists who wanted to do their own thing. There was a tremendous amount of Catholics, and of course the Puritans in New England, who weren't going to be lectured by anybody about how to burn witches properly, and a few other groups besides. And everybody was worried that some other group, mostly the Catholics, were going to end up running the federal government and force everyone else to be that. And they didn't like it.
Yeah. And don't forget, like, if you look at the English setup of power, the bishops have established power in that system. Like, they've been granted power. And don't forget, the US Constitution, it does not give the church any power within the state. In fact, it expressly prohibits the church from having any power within the state. So, this idea that it was based upon Christianity, I think, is very, very, very wrong. Very wrong. It's absolutely terrible. Because if you were to give the church some power within the state, you would write it into the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
You would absolutely write it into the Constitution. And they didn't. In fact, the only thing of the church in there is the Establishment Clause. You're not to establish a religion.
Sort of anti-woke backlash as well. There's a sort of progressivism that might be shorn of Christianity and become quite authoritarian, and people might be concerned about that. There's an anti-woke backlash that looks at that, and they call them the woke, and they actually want the...
What is the woke, Glenn? Could you define that for me? What is the woke? So, I think there is a backlash against progressivism, but I think it's based upon a foundation of lies. Right? Like, all of these things which has sort of had the backlash is that, we're going to make everybody be trans. We're going
for
to
everybody.
If you say something wrong, you're going to be thrown into prison, kind of thing. And I've heard MAGA people argue, well, if you say something wrong in England against, a certain group, you're going to be thrown in prison. That is 100% not true. England has free speech laws, just like most other places do, kind of thing. It's one thing to have hate speech laws. It's another to, if you disagree politically, that we're going to throw you in prison. Like, it is such a lie, and it's amazing how many people believe it. That outside America, if you say, if you're in England and say, hey, I don't like the king, that you're going to be thrown in prison. No, you're not. You're absolutely not. I mean, Alex O'Connor went on TV and said, I don't like the king, and he's walking free. So this is sort of a slippery slope fallacy. You're sort of saying, hey, if you don't allow people to rile people up to attack a capital or something, then you're going to imprison them if they, say they don't like your mother. No, that one doesn't lead to the other, right? We can have responsible hate speech laws that prevent people from riling up others to attack somebody and still have freedom of speech. It's not mutually exclusive.
Well, remember that time Jordan Peterson spent his entire life in prison because of Canadian Bill C-16?
Sorry?
Oh, right. He didn't do that.
I couldn't. I thought I'd missed some American history or something. What the hell?
Yeah, that was his whole, that's the reason he became famous, is because Canada was going to pass Bill C-16, which, protected people from certain forms of hate speech. And he was like, my freedoms, though. And he started throwing a shit fit and got lost his job as a professor and whatnot. And then he used that to justify, I'm being canceled for standing in favor of free speech, and ended up becoming the failing upward to the levels of success that he currently enjoys.
I mean, so if you have a problem with cancel culture, that's one thing. And I think that cancel culture arising is a symptom of the government's failure to rein in corporations and other entities which seem, rich people that seem beyond the reach of justice. Like if you've got a multi-billionaire in the Epstein class, you can apparently get away with anything. So I think that the social justice movement was a response to that. The only problem I have with that movement is that there's no accountability for people making false accusations, right? So when we're looking at, say, a justice system, there should be accountability for it making, you can sue the government if they put you in jail and ruin your life kind of thing. You can sue them, get reparations. I know it's difficult to do, but at least there's a mechanism there where there should be some accountability for people incorrectly being, attacked by social justice. But I think that is a lesser problem to what it's trying to address, which is the untouchability of certain people within our society, where the social landscape of just ordinary people want some kind of action to happen. I think that the untouchability of certain individuals is a huge problem. It's a massive problem.
The power thing and the dominance thing, and so people have become. They've seen that the story of the West has run out a little bit, and they're wondering, is there a grand narrative? And Tom Holland is giving them a historical narrative.
Do you broadly agree with the way Glen sees that?
I think so. I mean, with Ayan in particular, I think she's dealing with two things at once. She recounts a very personal depression that she'd fallen into, and it's an old story that religion can help you sort of climb out of that, or I should say relationship with God. At the same time, she's deeply worried about politics, and I think that new atheism fails to deliver on its promises, this sort of humanist utopia where everybody's acting in accordance with reason.
Well, I don't care for that, because what was promised, if we scrap this hierarchical authoritarian mythology and replace it with an egalitarian system, we will see better results as a society. We haven't actually done that. We haven't tested the premise yet.
Yeah, no, I would agree, and I'm not sure that New Atheism promised that. You know what I mean? I'm not sure that New Atheism, that was the promise. It was just that, hey, I could be wrong. I don't know if I would see myself as part of the New Atheist movement. I don't think so. I think I'm sort of post-New Atheist coming onto the scene. I think that, but to my mind, New Atheism didn't promise that. It just said that, hey, we can work with Christians in a more like you said, an egalitarian society, and that would be better for everybody. Separation of church and state is better for everybody. Not only because then the state can't determine what people believe or promote what people should believe, but it's also so the church can't, the state can't interfere with your church either. If your church wants to believe a certain thing, if you're not harming anybody, the state can't tell you what to do. Just like you shouldn't be able to tell the state what to do. So it stops influence both ways, which is why when we do have a separation of church and state sort of movement, there's a ton of Christians in it. Because they don't want the government saying, hey, you're not the right type of Christianity, you need to be more like this one.
Mm-hmm.
and we all live in harmony and all this just didn't emerge. And especially in politics in the past 10 years.
Well, when we all live in harmony, I don't think it promised that. I think that's unrealistic. But, the whole drawing away from secularism hasn't made things better. It's made things a lot worse. Right? You literally have people being shot in the streets. The countries that are secular, like the European Scandinavian countries, like Australia, they have been a lot more stable than recently with your religious overlord in there. I'm really sorry, but Project 2025, Project 2026, these are ostensibly and claim to be from a very fundamentalist religious place, and it is just chaos. People have said to me recently, they are envious that nothing has happened in Australia, right? That our big news is, someone found a puppy kind of thing. I'm not even joking. One of the banner news items was a puppy that was missing for 3 months turned up.
That's great. That's wonderful to hear. However, I would point out that in a country that is ruled over by emus, humans would get very little say, and so couldn't fuck up the nation that badly.
Well, that's true, but emus are so aggressive. They would probably turn upon each other. Emus are not capable of running a society because they're pricks to everybody, including each other.
That's true.
Okay, so just to share with you, I mean, this is the front page today in WA. So deaths in custody, yes, it's a big problem. How often is your front page central news that a black person died in police custody? That's the big news for today. Front page, yeah, that is the big thing. Now, Anzac Day, leaders condemn disgusting disruption. So it's people booing the Indigenous people of Australia. But do you see there? I saw a little nose poke around the corner. Puppy found after 3 months lost. That gets onto the front web page of news, because we don't have the nonsense over here that you guys are currently dealing with. I'm sorry if that upsets you, but that is the truth. Right? And so you have this problem, this massive problem where fundamentalist people are going around being racist, being horrible, being absolute, as they say on the news, cretins, right? They're basically disrupting the liberal democracy's idea of respecting everybody and all of this sort of normal stuff going on, blaming immigrants for stuff, right? And then saying it's liberal democracy that's failed. No, it's the influence of right-wing fundamentalist Christians that caused all of this.
Yeah, it's very much like Sarah McBride said in her speech, like a month after being sworn in or something like that, is we've got all these people who are doing their level best to keep a government from being functional, to keep it from working, so that they can tell you that government can't work.
Yes. And it's exactly what happened in a lot of totalitarian nations, like, for instance, what the Germans did. They basically went around with the brown shirts, beat a whole bunch of people, tried to disrupt democracy as much as possible, and then claim that liberal democracy has failed, so someone needs to take over. Spoiler alert, that person that took over did not care to make the lives of their people better. Right? It was just a way to get one person into power. And we can recognize this. It's happened all throughout history. Fascists are very happy to use democracy, freedom of speech, all of these Western liberal values to destroy Western liberal values. They're perfectly willing to do it. And it's only afterwards when they turn upon you, because you're not the right type of Christian, or you're not, you've gone, well, I don't really think those people should be killed, like what happened with the Catholic Church in Germany who helped the person get into power, and then he turned on them because they could probably remove him. And then they go, but I don't like what you're doing with them. Then you're on the chopping block. And I don't know why people don't pay attention to history.
I hate when people say, like, especially given the current climate, as if there's ever been a time in history where you can't say such a thing. There's always something going on. There's a world war, there's a pandemic. But I do think that the influence of mass immigration, which does seem genuinely novel, has caused a lot of people to suddenly be confronted by people who believe completely different things to them, and they're forced to sort of reassess what might have been the defining characteristics of their belief system. And a lot of the time, if the air is something that you don't really notice, you talk about it being the air you breathe and it being you don't even notice that it's there. If something comes along and essentially starts sort of changing the nature of the air, starts smelling of something a bit different, then you start to notice it. And so I think that it's kind of just a cultural moment. And one thesis is that the thing that we lost is belief in Christianity. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but I think a lot of people are attracted to it as a plausible option.
Okay, well, that's helpful and really helps to frame, I think, the conversation we're going to have now about whether it's plausible, this idea that obviously Tom Holland, but you, especially in The Air We Breathe, Glen, have given us, that ultimately many of the core values that most 21st century liberal Western people hold to and live their lives by fundamentally are irreducibly Christian at some level. The Air We Breathe, obviously, is your way of saying...
Yeah, he's going to mention the book 50 more times, so I'm assuming it's just come out. Yeah, I'd like to hear some of these things which are uniquely Christian that could not have come from any other place. I think that Alex is right. When you start to meet people from other cultures, and culture shock's a thing, don't get me wrong. You're like, oh, those people do this. It's totally understandable if you open your mind a little and talk to them, like actually have discussions with them. They essentially want the same things as you do. They want a safe, secure environment. They want, to live a relatively good life. They want it to take care of their children. They don't want that different than anybody else, even in your society. And so, all I would do is encourage you to talk to other people from other cultures with a bit of an open mind. Like, don't just assume what they want. Like, talk to them about what they want. I think it's sort of, it's
absolutely, because as many of you know, I've been what you might call a militant atheist for a pretty long time. Every so often, I run into a Christian who does nice things just because they're nice things to do. And it kind of, I've been surrounded by red hats for so very long. Every time that happens, I know it can happen, but when it does happen, it kind of blows my mind a little. I'm like, oh, you're
really?
What do you mean you're Christian? You're such a nice person, talk to people. The first time I actually got to meet a Muslim and talk with him, he invited me to come pray with him. It was time for dawn prayers. And I don't believe in Allah now any more than I believe in Yahweh, but it was a nice experience. It was a feeling of community with this person, opening up and showing me some of his world, a near total stranger. And that's kind of what Islam is actually all about, is community with our fellow humans,
Right. Hey, I would go do that. If a Muslim I've been invited to a service by, a evangelical group, and I went to that, and it didn't blow me away. I wasn't touched anyway, but it was, it's just to have the experience of going and seeing what they're talking about. I encourage it. I keep an open mind, and I would, if a Muslim, invited me to a prayer, why not? Why not? I don't think there's any God to judge me for it, so I'm quite fine to do that. I think that, hey, that might be interesting to do. At the same time, if someone invited me to, I don't know, try synchronized swimming, I'd probably do that as well. I don't have a problem with anything. There's certain things I wouldn't do and certain things I would, and I think most things I would like to have the experience, even if it doesn't do anything for me. Because how can you tell until you have the experience, right?
That's extremely true. I felt that way about philosophy initially. I thought it was like, nose in the air, smelling your own farts,
Yeah.
all this stuff. And then I took a philosophy class, and I'm like, oh, this shit's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I find it fascinating. Like, I totally understand like why people have a inherent dislike of it though, because I think that, some people use a tool to fix the sink, some people bludgeon people over the head with it. And I think it is like that. Like it can be used
Yeah.
sort of in good faith to make arguments, and it can be used, as a sort of bludgeon to make people feel like crap. And it really annoys me when people do that.
Almost don't notice this in our culture. We haven't, up till now at least, realized. But now perhaps you're pointing out that, as you say, some of these things need to be recognized and see that there is a source and so on. Why don't we start with compassion? Your book deals with about 7 different topics, but compassion, I think, is one of the easiest to get a grasp on, because there are some very specific ways, examples you give of the way that the early Christians.
I don't understand how you could say that compassion comes from Christianity. I mean, we see compassion in other great apes. We see compassion in chimpanzees taking care of sick members of the troop. I don't understand how, you get that coming from Christianity. I don't know. A lot of different societies were compassionate, at least towards their people. Do you think it's novel that Christianity says be compassionate towards the outsider, though? Do you think that's a novel idea?
Goodness, no. That was
Yeah.
I think it was Darius had a rule along
Persia?
those lines,
Yeah.
because he understood that like we have to trade with the people around us. Maybe
Right.
stop murdering them.
Yeah, and actually, now that I come to think of it, there was the law of hospitable Zeus, which meant that the visitor could not be harmed when they sort of came in your house, kind of thing. Like it was a blasphemy to harm the visitor that entered your house. So
A lot of traditions had something like that.
Yeah.
Inculcated what you believe are the kinds of values around kindness and compassion that we now take for granted. But maybe sketch out that, and then we'll see what Alex has to say.
Yeah, well, let me begin where Dominion begins, with the cross. And in my book, I talk about imagining myself into the shoes or into the sandals of a Roman centurion at the foot of the cross. And you really are dealing in a world of a very steep hierarchy of dominance, in which the slaves are absolutely at.
Are we talking about the Roman soldier that stabbed him in the side with a spear, or nay? Is that because I don't, my opinion of that story is that, and we've had a lot of arguments on the mythicist position going on around the place, and I'm not a mythicist, but I'm also, I would never die on that hill. I think that even if Jesus existed, he's been so mythologized that it's almost got no resemblance to anybody that lived in the real world, like the mythology that's been created. So, I mean, I don't take the mythicist position that's entirely mythical, but at the same time, I don't get the point, because even if he existed, he was just a dude. So did this centurion actually exist? Did he stab him in the side with a spear? I have no idea.
I don't know why he would, but does it really matter if the real, like, there's who was it? Someone recently posited that when you talk about Jesus, you have to disambiguate whether you're talking about the probably historical, but we're not really sure,
Right.
Yeshua,
Yeshua,
Ben
yeah.
Bar Joseph, or whatever, or the definitely fictional mythological character,
Right.
Jesus Christ,
Right. Yes. I mean, usually when people say Jesus, I'm talking about the character from the book, which, I mean, you get these books where you have a character and it might be based upon a real person. I think, who is it? Tom Clancy's series of books with like Jack Ryan is based upon a real person kind of thing, like loosely around a real. That's sort of the way I see Jesus. Like it's it's probably very, very loosely based around a real person, but hey, the
Right,
mythicists
like
absolutely disagree with me.
the Bones novels with
Right.
Dr. Temperance Brennan are based on the career of Kathy Reichs.
Right.
Based on. Inspired
based on.
by, even.
Yes. Yep. Yep. But, you know, all the rest. So when he's sort of saying, hey, imagine myself standing in the sandals of a centurion, you're kind of like, well, I imagine you know, I'm standing on the scene of the crime with the Bones doctor. And it's like, yeah, but that isn't a real character. It's based upon but that's not a real situation or where you would be or anything of the sort kind of thing. I don't know. It's kind of wild why you're sort of picturing yourself with somebody in a book that, yeah, anyway. I mean, he believes that it's real. Okay.
The bottom and the slave's death is the extreme penalty. And who should show up on that cross but the god?
Well, is that the slave's death? Is that, I mean, the Romans just didn't kill slaves like that. You know, like there wouldn't be, you know, did they crucify every single slave? The slave's death. I think that it's more the criminal's death than the slave's death. Like, it's not really accurate to say that.
As I understand it. Like, being a slave was not a crime. I mean, you could be enslaved as a punishment for a crime, but you weren't executed for being a slave.
Right. So, I mean, usually a slave's death would just be, you know, natural causes as you worked all your life, or I mean, it's a very weird thing to say. I don't think Glen's accurately portrayed that. It's a criminal's death, not a slave's one. Weird. What a weird guy.
Of heaven. And it's the Jews in particular who are proclaiming that God has shown up on this cross, and of all the people to say the word God, you know, they're saying it with a weight that goes far beyond anything that the Romans were used to. And here is the great story that, according to
the Romans had encountered a few monotheistic cults from time to time. I forget when Elagabalus was empress, but they have had emperors who were like, yeah, there's only one true God. It's the sun. It's obviously the sun. The sun is real. It's the source of all life. It is the sun. You know, and this has happened a few times throughout history. You know.
The scripture, according to believers, you know, here is the highest figure descending to the deepest depths to have the greatest effect on the most number of people for the longest duration. Here is an unimprovable story of compassion, because I think, naturally speaking, it is survival of the fittest, and therefore the weakest are cast off.
You don't understand evolution. He doesn't understand what survival of the fittest means.
Yeah. It's not anything like survival of the fittest.
Yeah, no, survival of the fittest is not cast off the weak. In social animals, it's important to take care of every member. There might be instances where the weak don't survive, but I don't think that's the intention of the group to sacrifice the weak. It's just that's what happens. You know, when a you know, lion goes after the weakest buffalo or whatever, the weakest bison, the weakest antelope. It's not that the antelopes go, hey, throw that guy to the lions. No, that's not what's happening there. Like, they don't cast it off. It's just the nature of striving to survive. But with social species, you don't cast off the weak because your strength lies in solidarity, right? Your strength lies in having a united front. So Glen just said, I don't understand evolution without saying I don't understand evolution. If he thinks survival of the fittest means that you throw away the weak, that is not the case.
Yeah, there's very, very few societies in all of human history where we would call the weak or what the fuck ever, because everybody has some kind of value. Maybe, you know, not everyone in Sparta was a fucking soldier. They still needed farmers, you know?
Well, yeah, that was what the they had a slave caste that did all the work for them, basically, the helots. The helots were basically their servants, and they concerned themselves with running the state and war and things like that, while the helots did all of the work, kind of thing. So that was the way they had their system set up. The problem was when they got into fights with other city-states, is other city-states would, not just have slaves doing their stuff, they would have free people that would work on their behalf, and, free people being soldiers, and there's a lot more free people than there are overlords. So, they essentially got beaten by other city-states because other city-states had a better system than just, these guys are the warriors and these guys are the servants, kind of thing.
And here is the sacrifice of the fittest for we the weakest, so that we the weakest might survive and thrive and pass on a compassion revolution. And I think it really was a compassion revolution. Theresa Morgan often notes that a very common aphorism back in Roman times was, every day do something to help your friends and harm your enemies. And we all resonate with the first half of that, and the second half we go, yikes, and we distance ourselves from that second half. But I think that second half makes perfect sense in a brutal world of scarcity. It makes perfect sense in an evolutionary frame. If you're just thinking about in-group amity and out-group enmity, it seems to perfectly describe nature in that sense. And that's why...
He's basically describing tribalism. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Tribalism is definitely a problem, but
that was sort of a thing with actually that was one of the things that helped Christianity rise, is even though they did have the in-group out-group thing, the same as every other fucking tribal group at the time, the Christians were a little bit more accepting of outsiders if you were willing to join their ranks, right? Like they would go to other cities and be like, hey, you can be one of us. Whereas the Jews would be like, you could be one of us, but you have to earn it,
Yeah. And tribalism is more prevalent among Christian people in modern society than they are atheists. One study that they did was looking at charity. Atheists had a greater tendency to ignore in-group, out-group when giving to charity, whereas Christians will give to other Christians, but not to anybody else. That was the tendency that they found. So you do have to acknowledge that in this tribalism, Christianity is horrendously guilty of that, especially throughout the ages. If you look back in the past, if the Catholic Church had a group that they didn't see as their in-group, that group wasn't around for very long. They would be absolutely wiped off the face of the earth, and they did so on many occasions. I can name the Cathars, the Lombards, the different denominations that they thought. The Templars, sure, yeah. I mean, that might have been political rather than religious, to be honest with you, because the Templars had
a difference.
Well, I mean, it was said for religious reasons. It was said that they were blasphemous. They definitely used that Christianity out-group as the reason rather than some kind of political reason. So the reasons they gave were religious. But a lot of people think that it may be because the Templars got too powerful, had too much holdings, had too much land and power, and the Catholic Church went, no, we don't like ye.
Yeah.
Why Nietzsche called this a transvaluation of all values. That you have the highest figure descending to the deepest depth in order to have compassion on us, and it burst a compassion revolution in people who are taking that story very, very seriously. And things like charity, the way we think of charity today, hospitals, the way we think of hospitals today, orphan care that you've already mentioned, the way that we think of orphan care today, and then the abolition of things like the gladiatorial games, or the abolition of pederasty, the abolition of infanticide. Absolutely.
The abolition of pederasty. Have you seen all of the churches?
Right. All of these things didn't get abolished during the Dark Ages, kind of thing. Like jousts and tournaments and things where people did die wasn't wiped out under Christianity. They seem to have been taken away more to do with the Enlightenment than anything else, in the Renaissance, rather than, when Christians were in power. I'm not sure how you sort of say, hey, there was this.
We still do gladiatorial combat. We just call
Kind
it
of.
football or soccer or whatever,
MMA, yeah, UFC or whatever, yeah. So, and it's interesting because I think he's sort of taking a pop view of Roman gladiatorial games where, these fights to the death, it was rarely to the death, my guy. Very, very rare, because those gladiators were worth a lot of money. So it wasn't like it would be unusual if it was a fight to the death. It would more
it'd be like taking racehorses and making them go until one of them dropped dead. Like, that's not what racehorses are for, and they're very valuable.
Yes. So this myth of, there was just carnage and death in the gladiatorial games isn't. I mean, yes, there were definitely death there, much more than what we'd accept. Definitely slaves got killed a lot. There was all kinds of, if you're swinging a sword, you can't guarantee you'll injure somebody. It, may have killed people, got you. But, this whole idea that, they went in and fought to the death, that isn't necessarily accurate. I'm sorry, it just isn't.
On the statute books, the first people ever to outlaw this practice it's close to a human universal. Tacitus, speaks of some German tribes that don't kill their offspring, and that was remarkable to him. But exposing infants, largely girls.
Wait. If you had some Germanic tribes that didn't do that, then that idea arose without Christianity, right? Then,
and again, Christians kept doing it right up to the present day.
Yes, yeah. Christians definitely in Europe were doing exposure when they couldn't afford to feed children. That was a thing. It's probably where the story of Hansel and Gretel came from.
Could be.
The disabled was just a very common practice. And now I
just explain what exposing means for those who perhaps aren't familiar with the terminology.
Right, leaving them in a rubbish dump to die of exposure or be taken by dogs, or putting them down a well, or drowning them in rivers, killing them. And I think there's an example of a moral intuition that has gone from, certainly it might be grubby, it might be unfortunate, it can be explicable and excused, though, in a sort of a Roman frame as in a time of scarcity. This is, needs must, but I don't think any of those kind of I don't think any of those justifications fly with us nowadays, and I don't think Rome itself was going to bring any of those reforms about under its own steam, given its own kind of moral and spiritual resources. I think it's definitely Christianity that has brought those about, and there is an example, I think, of.
Well, I don't know about that, because when the Eastern Roman Empire started, basically when Rome fell apart, Eastern Roman Empire, Western Roman Empire, and Constantine really set up the Eastern Roman Empire, where you have the Basilius, who was the head of state and the head of church, right? He was the main patriarch of the church, as well as the emperor of the Byzantine Empire. There was still slaves and murders and horrible things going on. It didn't stop that, right? Like, what are we talking about here? That wasn't the Byzantine Empire was a pretty horrible place as well. Oh, did Max just raided us? If Max raided us, thank you, Max. I appreciate it. I don't know if you did. You may have, you may not have. Yeah, it might be the case, may not be. But thank you if you did. If you were still going, I would have raided you, man. Like, seriously, I saw you live. I must admit, call me out. But yeah, I think that the Byzantine Empire is a case where Christianity was definitely in control and didn't really fix anything. It was still just the sort of normal Christian in charge doing the normal Eastern Roman Empire stuff.
Of some compassionate moral intuitions that ground themselves in some moral progress, and it is certainly Christians who are at the forefront of that.
Okay.
It's
Thoughts,
weird.
Alex?
Well, there's a lot to say, right? I mean, like I say, I don't want to the sin I think both sides, as it were, commit on this issue is, I think, an overemphasis, is to say that in the same way that you might say exposure in the ancient world, it does seem to be that we have records of Christians being the ones who are sort of anti this, who are sort of the antidote to exposure. And of course, yeah, happy to grant that. I just don't want to overstep the influence of Christianity in particular over the entire development of the Western tradition. In the same way, I might want to talk about the way that the church has stood in the way of a number of important instances of progress towards the West today. And I don't mean moral progress in an objective sense. I just mean movement from where it was to where it is. But you then wouldn't want me to overstep and say, therefore, the church has been, the greatest roadblock in Christianity is evil and terrible. So I just don't want to overstate the case. My biggest problem with Christianity as responsible for these developments is its attachment to Judaism, to the extent that in the early church, Marcion famously thought that the God of the Old Testament could not be the same God of Jesus. He produces this text called the Antithesis, where he compares the doings, the sayings and doings of the Old Testament God and Jesus, and says these cannot be the same kind of person. And as long as you've got this attachment to this Jewish tradition, I find it very difficult to square how you have these kinds of condemnations that Christianity, allows people to have of Roman practices, without them similarly indicting the God that I'm told is the God that sort of came down into the figure of Jesus. They sort of have this excusability with the Jewish God. Now, you might say,
I would agree with that. I think that if you look at the character of Jesus as written in the books, and you look at the character of Yahweh in the books, look, either Yahweh got brain damage and completely changed personality, or that is a different person. Because these two people are so antithetical to one another. I mean, I like the idea of Marcion writing a book of the Antithesis, because it is so antithetical to what, like, if Jesus met Yahweh, he would be like, this is the worst person I've ever met. He needs to be saved, like, it is just ridiculous that they sort of say, hey, it's the same God, but different persons. It's wild.
There's I don't know. He's making some odd statements, but
Who?
I get
Alex.
the general thrust of where he's going. That I don't know. He cluttered the statement, and as a person who's prone to tangents, I expect more clear to the point from Alex, and maybe he's just trying to quash qualifiers that either Justin or Glen might bring up. But it seems to me I'm used to more straightforward communication. Like, he could say, well, I will happily grant all the things you've said, even in my opinion, they're not actually true, but let's grant them just so we can get to the point, which is, why does it seem like whenever we do make moral progress, the church is the anchor rather than the leader?
Right. Okay. No, that's a fair point. And I totally get what you're saying. I think that Alex is making an attack on the whole idea of the history of the church has been a tendency towards these moral Western values. That if you're going to include the Old Testament in the canon of the story, then it really is the anchor, because you're still anchored by 10 commandments, for instance. Thou shalt have no other God but me. That is really antithetical to Western values of you should be able to choose your own religion. Like, that is antithetical to everything in Western values. So if you're going to take that with you into the modern day, I think he's trying to set that up, that that is a that's going to be his argument, that is an anchor. It is a massive roadblock to getting to Western values if your book says, I am the Lord your God and you shall have no other God but me. And that's the first commandment. That's the very first one, right? That is the main one. And then it sort of shows all of these instances, like where Moses comes down from the mountain, the rest of the tribes are worshipping a false god, a golden calf, and then he gets the Levites to slaughter the lot of them with swords. Right? Like, is that a Western value? Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
well, not a modern one, but also what Alex said at the beginning, this idea that moral progress, if the Bible is the foundation of knowledge, how is there moral progress? Why was the Bible wrong?
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there is nowhere in the Bible that prohibits a slave trade from being institutionalized into um, a society, right? There's only, hey, you shouldn't kidnap people, i.e., you shouldn't go and make someone a slave when they don't deserve to be. But it does say, hey, you can sell yourself into slavery and you can buy slaves from the nations around you. It doesn't prohibit a slave trade. It just prohibits one avenue of illegally making slaves out of your neighbors, essentially.
As long as it's legal.
Yeah, and sort of even the New
That's
Testament, it
an
has
interesting idea that we
what's
don't
that?
see expressed in these kinds of debates is, could it be one of the things that was new and unique about Judaism was the intent to use to fuse religion with law, like law, as opposed to like ecumenical law, like in, say, for example, ancient Egypt, where like this god said this, so you didn't do that
Right.
in the temple, or this god said that. But in everyday life, there was the secular law of the ruler, and the gods had influence, but not like God said this. But the Jewish tribes were, maybe this was a unique thing to them, where they're saying, well, the secular law is this because God said so, you know?
Right. I don't think that's the first instance of. Well, it's not the first instance of slavery in text. I think that's actually the Mesopotamian one, the Code of something. I can't remember the name of it. Code of Namu, something like that. I keep
You're
forgetting the
close.
name of it.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
in the
yeah, I'm
neighborhood.
close.
Yeah.
Right. So that had instances of like, if a slave runs away, the bounty for returning them is this amount, kind of thing. It's very similar to the Old Testament text. Actually, it's very, very similar. You'll notice the parallels between them, and of course, Mesopotamia is kind of the area at the time, so that's hardly surprising. But that gives evidence that it was written by people and not a god. So. It definitely isn't the earliest to have slavery in some kind of legal text. But so I don't think so. I'm not sure if it is, if the Code of Namu sort of has a god in it, though. Like God says to do this, so therefore it's law, kind of thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder, because I wonder if that's like where this fixation, the unspoken origin of these Christian fundamentalists who think that laws should be based on what God said. And it's true, they don't
Right.
have an exclusive on that, but it seems to be that every tradition that tries something like that is derived from the Abrahamic faiths, you know?
Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, that might be a question for Dr. Josh or Dr. Kip, like whether that is the first instance of. I would imagine that perhaps in other places there have been God-approved scripts. I just don't know. I don't know. That would be a really interesting question for the scholars that we know, though.
Yeah, well, we need cross scholars, right? Because it's not
Right.
just about the Levant region. I'm
Yes.
thinking, for example, of the Maya, who showed up much, much later, but
Hmm.
still they had a civilization where a lot of their ways, I don't know if they were like laws, but a lot of traditions were based on what the lords of Sabalba wanted. This is how, like the eventual Mexica cult in the Aztec Empire with their blood god and the constant sacrifices. That was the law because that's what the god wanted.
Okay, we'll
But
take this with a grain of salt because it is sort of the AI overview. Apparently, the earliest widely recognized example of laws attributed to the god is the code received by Babylonian king Hammurabi from the sun god Shamash, approximately 750 to 772 BC. While earlier Mesopotamian codes exist, Hammurabi's 282 laws are the most famous ancient example of a ruler claiming divine authority to bring justice and protect the weak. Interesting. So that protect the weak, apparently, Code of Hammurabi had that in it. So not exclusively
Ancient
Christian.
populism. Oh, goodness. If I were still doing my Deep Dives Daily show, this episode of Debate Review would give me a whole week full of topics.
Okay, well, go for it. Go for it. I don't know.
Maybe someday.
Maybe.
We'll see.
That the very means by which they're able to look at the Jewish God and say, these are things which trouble me and things I don't like, is essentially Christian. But if that's the case, then you're kind of left with a paradox as to what you're talking about when it comes to Christian values. If you want to agree with what I'm saying, which is that those are still present in the Old Testament, then you kind of become a bit of a Marcionite in saying that, well, the only thing that matters is Jesus. We can just kind of ignore the Old Testament, say that that was wrong and that doesn't matter. Or if you need to own it and not be a Marcionite, not be a heretic, then you need to offer an account for how that wasn't wrong when Yahweh was doing it. And how, it's okay for Jesus to enter into that world and not be seen as this sort of, fundamental negation of the Jewish religion. Whereas when he does it for the Romans, it's a negation as well. Also, it's quite easy to pick on specific examples. For example...
Oh, I get you. Okay, so what he's arguing is that if you're saying, hey, Jesus came in and negated all of the brutality of the Roman Empire, which led to the Western values, then you've got to acknowledge that he negated the Jewish part as well, that negated Yahweh.
Yeah,
which
it's a double standard.
Right, I got you.
Why do the Romans invade Gaul? We have Julius Caesar's own words as to why he invaded Gaul. What are some of the reasons? Do we know? Well, one reason he gives is that the people there essentially are practicing human sacrifice. He includes this as one of the things that these people do, which, it sort of carries some of the justification for invading. Now, of course, in his heart of hearts, Julius Caesar probably just wanted Gaul for himself, but he at least appealed to this notion. Now, I could easily say, look, there is this, popular Judeo-Christian tradition, which has this sort of, which is totally okay with human sacrifice. The famous story of Abraham and Isaac, of course, Abraham doesn't sacrifice Isaac in the end, but it's the willingness to commit, and indeed, the sacrifice of his own child in reverence to this sort of strange ancient philosophical belief that they have, which we would never recognize today, that you should sacrifice your own children on behalf of your philosophical convictions. Also in Exodus chapter 22, verse 29, there's this very strange injunction to sacrifice your children to God, which is immediately renegotiated, where God says, as with the lamb, please pull it up. And there's a lot of debate about exactly what that means. Some people think that this actually would be an instance of you will, I forget the term, but you sacrifice someone else in their place, but on the 8th day, you give your firstborn to the Lord, as you do with animals as well. While you're looking at that, I'll give you another example, because that one's a bit more controversial, but I can...
Yeah, and so scholars sort of talk about that, and a lot of scholars believe, I think that a majority of them believe that, consecrating your child to the temple meant sacrificing them. So I know that a lot of
alternatives, but none of them hold up for very, very long. However, we do have an interesting passage that a few apologists who actually read their Bible have brought to my attention. It's in Jeremiah, I think, chapter 7, where Yahweh says something to the effect of some of my chosen people have been sacrificing their children, and I never asked for that. It never entered my mind. So it's like a little bit later, they retconned the child sacrifice. But you can't retcon the child sacrifice without implicitly admitting there was the child sacrifice,
Right.
Easily point to it, especially as an ancient reader looking back and saying, look at what was present there. Of course, Christianity itself is predicated on human sacrifice, which is the sacrifice of Jesus. Now, I could say, look at this strange intuition that nobody thought, nobody seems to sort of have qualm with this kind of thing. Of course, in some Old Testament passages, Israel does end up having a qualm with human sacrifice. I think that's a renegotiation of the principle. But I could say, but look, then you have this Roman tradition, which looks at the human sacrifice of the Gauls and says, no, that's terrible, we're going to invade and we're going to civilize them. And say, see, so the sort of respect for the sanctity of humans and the abolition of human sacrifice, we're really indebted to the Romans for that. I think that would just be a bit too simple. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, maybe that's a good place to leave it. But I agree. I agree with Alex. I think that sort of just going, Christianity had this value, it must have been the place where Western value got it from. Yeah, it's a lot more complicated than that. I think that there are all kinds of influences on Western society. I think that the ancient Greeks contributed to it. The ancient Romans contributed to it. The society, the Enlightenment had a massive, profound impact on modern society and the Western society, like incredibly profound. I would never say that Christians didn't have a impact on it. Of course, Christianity had a massive impact on Western society. It was the only religion allowed on pain of death for quite some time. So of course it had a massive impact on it. I would be surprised if it didn't. I would be aghast if it didn't. But the whole thing of do we owe the Western society's values to Christianity, I don't think is true. I think that is I don't think it gave us Western values. I think it influenced the values that were developed along the way, but I don't think it just gave us its values, because never in the past has Christianity had the Western values that we have today.
Yeah, I really like Alex's point that you could make any value, point at any value,
Right.
and you could argue that something else was the source for that.
Right.
And it would be overly simplistic to say we owe thus and such to the Roman Empire, because this is the thing that we keep running into when we address Christianity. There's this monocausataxophilia, this love of single causes, and almost nothing in reality has a single cause. There's a bunch of things that contribute.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the same would be of the Enlightenment and the Renaissance. The Enlightenment, did it give us modern Western values? No, of course it didn't. Did it contribute heavily to the development of those values? Absolutely. Like, this is the problem. It's kind of this really myopic view that because something happened before another thing, that we just got it from that. And I think that's, it's kind of like when you talk to somebody and sort of go, well, why don't you like a certain thing? Like, why don't you like, blood sports or something? Why don't you like college? It's rarely going to be, oh, well, this one thing is the only reason, right? Like, it's going to be a complex web of reasons that all contribute to the formation you found. Like, you might go, well, I just don't find it exciting, and I'm kind of bored when I'm watching it, and I don't like that people are getting hurt. It'll be a myriad of reasons. So this whole idea of, well, because Christianity came before this and it had an influence on the idea, that's where it had to come from, is ridiculous. And as I pointed out, there's core tenets of Christianity that seem to be antithetical to Western values. And I would point number one as being freedom of religion. Christianity, look, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it says to attack people of a religion. I'm not saying it promotes violence of a people's religion, but it certainly doesn't promote people to freely choose by their own conscience what religion they want. Christianity really does promote that there is only one God. It is your God, the Lord, and you should worship that God, the Jesus, right? It doesn't promote, hey, you should be free to worship whoever. And I do acknowledge that Christianity makes a tacit threat of punishment should you not worship that God. Like, you are going to be tortured forever if you don't worship this God. So I really think that idea alone really destroys the idea that everything comes from Christianity that we have as Western values. And, I realize that some people are like, well, that's not a Western value. It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And what gets me is people want to regress to this, oh, we don't like democracy anymore. So you want to go back to totalitarianism? You want to go back to monarchy, where people just lived in squalor?
make serfs great again.
Ugh, wow. Because odds on you're going to be a serf, a peasant, and you will have nothing and be forced to work from sunrise to sunset for almost nothing to just afford your gruel.
Or not
Yeah.
afford your rule. It's
But it's amazing how often the same tricks are being used. Worship a god. He wants you as your place as this low-born peasant. And so you get peasants going, well, I want to be a peasant because that's the will of God. Really? Wild. Absolutely wild. But, any other thoughts about that debate? I'm actually quite enjoyed it. I think this is a question that, I think that Alex is doing good pushback. I know that the second half of this is actually a lot more engaging from Alex's side, and he makes a lot better arguments. I think he's just sort of warming up to it.
He is just starting to cook, it seems, thus far.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot here that we can dig into. Aside from the main premise of the debate, they're touching, well, this is why we love these debates, is because they touch on so many side topics.
Right.
Because Western values is such a broad field, they want to, get specific about, well, what do you mean? Let's look at this and let's look at this. And yeah, so there's a lot here. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if you want to help out, like, subscribe, share with a friend, just do whatever you want to help. That would be fantastic. We will be back over at Ember's Place. Oh, you got it. Okay, fantastic. I will pin that. I will be back in a couple of days with my usual Is God the Arsehole, which will be fun. That's always a lot of fun. And you can join us then. That was really fun. Thank you for joining us. Do remember, be kind to yourself and be kind to each other. And that's a Western value. Did not necessarily rise with Christianity, because Christianity doesn't tell you to be kind to yourself. It kind of more says you are as rags and worth nothing. And that is not a healthy way to live, unfortunately. And I don't think it's a Western value. I think you do have to be kind to yourself. I think you have to moderate the two. Everything in moderation. But do take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.
To what new horizons can we look now? Where are tomorrow's opportunities? The frontiers of the future are not on any map. But now, what's ahead of us?